The heavy rain hammered violently against the tall, arched courthouse windows as Nora Leighton's trembling, pale hand slowly slid the thick stack of divorce papers across the polished mahogany table. Her husband, billionaire tech mogul Adrian Kane, didn't even bother to show his face today. He had simply sent his ruthless, high-priced lawyer to handle the messy details. Outside the heavy oak doors, dozens of hungry paparazzi cameras waited impatiently in the storm, eager to capture the spectacular public fall of Manhattan's supposedly perfect wife. Nora finally pushed through the doors and walked blindly out into the raging storm. Thick black mascara was already streaking down her cold face, her heart physically collapsing with every blinding flash of light from the cameras. As she stumbled toward her waiting car, she passed a brightly lit newsstand. The bold, glaring headline screamed out at her: Adrian Kane marries best friend. Sloane Park in secret ceremony. Nora gasped, and her cell phone dropped from her shaking hands onto the wet pavement just as a massive crack of thunder split the gray sky. She was currently pregnant with the child of the very man who had just secretly married her absolute best friend. Later that same miserable evening, the late-night flight to Geneva, Switzerland, began boarding at Gate 47. The terminal was half empty, filled mostly with quiet, exhausted business travelers and weary tourists clutching neck pillows. Nora Leighton stood silently in the queue, clutching her navy blue passport to her chest like it was her only remaining lifeline to sanity. Her dark eyes were heavily swollen from hours of uncontrollable crying, and her racing mind was violently spinning back and forth between sheer, paralyzing disbelief and blinding, hot fury, just as she hesitantly handed her first-class ticket to the cheerful gate attendant. A deep, authoritative voice directly behind her spoke up. Mrs. Leighton, please, don't board that plane just yet. She turned around sharply, her heart jumping. A tall, striking man in a tailored, expensive charcoal overcoat stood there. He held out a thick, cream-colored envelope, securely sealed with a heavy gold wax emblem. She recognized the stamp instantly, Kane Quantum. She also recognized the man standing in front of her. It was Graham Sterling, the notoriously outspoken, ruthless venture capitalist investor who had once famously gone on CNBC and publicly called her husband Adrian a brilliant genius, tragically trapped by his own massive ego. How on earth do you know my name? She demanded, her voice hoarse but defensive. He smiled a very faint, knowing smile. I know it because you single-handedly designed Kane Quantum's entire corporate branding strategy 3 years ago. And because, legally speaking, Adrian Kane is still technically on the payroll for a foundational contract that you personally wrote. Nora blinked in sheer confusion, wiping a stray tear. That contract legally expired the exact second I signed those divorce papers this afternoon. Not according to this, Graham replied smoothly, tapping the heavy envelope against his palm. Inside this envelope is a highly confidential medical Document that your ex-husband officially filed 2 weeks ago. He legally requested a covert paternity confirmation. Graham paused, letting the words sink in. But someone actively stopped the process before the medical lab could even process the sample. Her damaged heart stuttered violently in her chest. Paternity? Graham nodded grimly. Adrian absolutely never saw the actual results because they were intentionally buried. You clearly think he callously abandoned you today, but perhaps someone else desperately wanted him to. Nora physically felt the breathable air thin out around her. Final boarding call for Flight 802 to Geneva, the gate agent announced loudly. Over the intercom. Ma'am, if you're getting on this flight, now is the time. She stared at the open jet bridge, then back at Graham. She slowly took the heavy envelope from his hand, hesitated for a long, agonizing moment, and then said incredibly quietly, I can't. Not yet. Good, Graham replied approvingly. Because unfortunately, there's more. Sloan. Park personally authorized a massive crisis management payment the exact same week of the paternity request. She wired $500,000 from a dummy account to a shady PR firm called Ames Consulting. Nora felt her weak knees completely buckle beneath her. She grabbed the edge of the ticketing counter to steady herself. That's her old political fixer. What exactly are you saying to me? Nora whispered, dread pooling in her stomach. I'm saying that your beloved best friend may have entirely staged your public downfall, he said evenly, his gray eyes piercing. Before you permanently disappear into the mountains of Switzerland to hide, you absolutely deserve to know the whole ugly story. But Nora suddenly couldn't breathe. Her vision rapidly blurred at the edges, and her entire body began to tremble uncontrollably. She pressed a shaking, cold hand firmly against her stomach, right where a very faint, sharp ache had just begun to pulse violently beneath her ribs. I have to go, she whispered frantically, turning away. Graham stepped back quickly, genuine concern finally flickering across his normally cold, unreadable eyes. At the very least, take my private card. You are absolutely going to need a powerful ally in this. She accepted the sleek black business card mechanically, blindly tucking it inside her passport. Then, she turned her back on him and walked quickly down the long jet bridge, the heavy, sealed envelope clutched in her hand like a burning, radioactive secret. Many grueling hours later, the plane finally touched down smoothly on the icy tarmac in Geneva. Thick, white snow swirled violently under the soft, yellow streetlights outside the airport terminal. Dr. Elodie Marchand was already waiting anxiously by the international arrivals gate. Her usually warm face was incredibly calm, but her eyes held a deep, undeniable urgency. You made it here just in time. Nora, she said quickly, grabbing her suitcase. I reviewed your latest scans from New York. Your test results clearly show a very rare twin condition. We absolutely must monitor you at the hospital. Immediately. Twins, Nora whispered, completely stunned, stopping dead in her tracks. Dr. Marchand nodded gently, placing a comforting hand on her arm. They are mirror twins, Nora, and they are currently sharing one single circulatory link. It is an incredibly dangerous situation, but it is not hopeless. You must stay here with me. Later that night, at the private clinic, Nora lay quietly in a sterile, white hospital room that smelled strongly of harsh antiseptic and calming lavender. Soap. Medical machines beeped in a steady, reassuring rhythm right beside her. Bed. For the very first time in weeks, the loud, chaotic, toxic noise of Manhattan finally felt miles and miles distant. She stared intently at the glowing ultrasound screen beside her bed. There were two tiny, distinct flickers of life pulsing rapidly on the monitor, looking exactly like tiny, shining stars in the dark universe. When Dr. Marchand finally left the room to review the charts, Nora reached deep into her leather purse and slowly pulled out the sealed envelope Graham Sterling had given her at the airport. She broke the gold wax seal and opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a high-quality photocopy of a medical lab form. Adrian's unmistakable, sprawling signature was scrolled hastily beside a checked box that read, Request for DNA paternity test, Nora Leighton sample. Directly below his signature, written in entirely different, sharply angled handwriting, a quick note read, Void test PRSP. Sloan Park. Her stomach violently twisted into a sickening knot. So, it was actually true. Her best friend had maliciously intervened, illegally deleted the medical test, permanently silenced the truth from her husband, and meticulously ensured that the entire world saw Nora as nothing more than the bitter, crazy ex-wife. Nora stared up at the flickering, fluorescent ceiling light and whispered fiercely into the empty room. You desperately wanted me completely gone. Sloan. Fine. I will gladly disappear into the dark. But I promise you, I will come back. When you absolutely least expect it. Outside her window, Geneva's freezing night air howled aggressively across the Rhone River. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in a luxurious New York penthouse, Sloan Park sat comfortably before her massive, lighted vanity mirror, blissfully scrolling through her heavily edited, glamorous wedding photos on Instagram. The massive, flawless diamond on her finger glittered brilliantly under the soft, warm light. Then, suddenly, from her private email inbox, a brand new notification popped up. On her screen, one new video file uploaded. Subject, St. Tropez. Her perfectly manicured finger hovered nervously over the laptop's trackpad. She clicked the file, and her blood instantly ran cold. On the bright screen, her own beautiful face appeared. She was laughing loudly, intimately whispering into the ear of a handsome man who was definitively not Adrian Kane. The high-definition screen flickered vibrantly to life, clearly showing the golden, sun-drenched coast of St. Tropez from 2 summers earlier. Brilliant. Sunlight was spilling over massive, white megayachts, and loud, carefree laughter echoed clearly across the teak deck. Sloane Park leaned significantly closer to her laptop, her heart pounding a frantic, terrifying rhythm against her ribs. The hidden camera video clearly showed her wearing a flowing, expensive silk dress, casually holding a crystal champagne flute. She was whispering intensely to a man wearing dark sunglasses. It was Marcus Ames, the ruthless, expensive PR fixer she had secretly hired to aggressively manipulate and manage Nora's public image during the divorce. The hidden camera smoothly panned closer, catching her sharp voice perfectly over the ambient noise of the yacht. If Nora is actually pregnant, Marcus, we desperately need to control the narrative immediately. A messy baby scandal right before the IPO would completely kill everything we've built. Handle it quietly. Make her look crazy. And you'll get your massive bonus. Then, the video clearly showed her hand discreetly slipping him a small, dark, velvet pouch, the exact same velvet pouch she had been holding in the clinic. Security video. The man smirked knowingly, quickly pocketing the bribe. Sloane's breath violently caught in her throat. Who on earth recorded this? Her cell phone suddenly buzzed loudly on the vanity. It was Adrian calling. She completely ignored it. Sheer, unadulterated panic rapidly sharpening her thoughts. The video finally ended with her saying coldly, "Absolutely no one needs to know the real timeline. Marcus, make it permanently disappear." She violently slammed the silver laptop shut, her entire body physically trembling. The pale, terrified reflection in the glossy screen stared back at her. It was a woman she barely recognized anymore. Cold, calculating, and entirely cornered. Across the vast ocean, in her quiet room in Geneva, Nora Leighton woke suddenly to the terrifying sound of a medical monitor beeping frantically. The twins' fragile heart rates had dangerously dipped again in the night. Dr. Marchand and 2 experienced nurses worked incredibly swiftly, adjusting for lines and pushing medications. Nora desperately tried to sit up, but a blinding, hot pain shot entirely through her lower abdomen. "Stay perfectly still, Dr. Marchand commanded gently but firmly. "We will stabilize them. Talk to them, Nora. It actually helps." Nora placed a shaky, cold hand over her swelling belly. "It's okay, my sweet loves. You are infinitely stronger than they know." Slowly, the frantic monitor steadied. The 2 tiny, rapid beats found their healthy rhythm once again. Later that same evening, sitting under the harsh, sterile hospital light, Nora mindlessly scrolled through her phone out of sheer habit. Sloane's lavish wedding photos completely filled every single tabloid headline. From best friend to billionaire bride. There they were, posing beautifully at the Beverly Hills Hotel. Completely surrounded by thousands of rare, lilac hydrangeas. Nora's heart broke all over. Again. They were her absolute favorite flowers. Sloane had literally copied them. Directly from the secret wedding mood board Nora had once designed for her own dream vow renewal. She locked the screen and whispered bitterly to herself. She even stole the damn flowers. A young nurse entered the room quietly. "I have a secure message for you, Miss Leon." It arrived via courier from New York. Nora frowned deeply, taking the heavily sealed envelope. Inside was a small, encrypted flash drive and a short note written in incredibly neat, precise handwriting. "You absolutely don't know me, but I firmly believe in true justice. Plug this in when you're completely ready." There was absolutely no signature and no return address. Nora hesitated for a long moment. Graham Sterling's ominous warning echoed loudly in her mind. "You'll need allies." She cautiously connected the small drive to her laptop. The screen instantly filled with multiple encrypted folders. One was prominently labeled St. Tropez. Her pulse raced as she clicked it. The exact same damning video that had just violently shaken Sloane to her core now played clearly for Nora. Her jaw dropped in absolute shock as she watched her former trusted best friend actively whispering bribes, callously trading away Nora's personal privacy and her future, just for corporate control. Hot, angry tears blurred her vision, but the deep, righteous anger inside her burned significantly hotter than the sorrow. She hit pause on the screen the exact moment Sloane said, "Make it disappear." Nora whispered fiercely to the frozen image. "No, Sloane. I am going to make absolutely sure it doesn't." She quickly and expertly copied the massive video file to her secure, encrypted cloud backup, and then sent a highly secure, time-sensitive link directly to Maya Patel, her trusted bulldog attorney back in New York. The attached message read simply, "Keep this incredibly safe. I will explain everything later." Back in New York, Sloane's phone chimed aggressively again. It was an automated security alert from her iCloud account. "Your video file, St_Tropez, was successfully synced to another unknown device." Her toxic blood ran completely cold. "No," she breathed in horror, rushing frantically to check her security settings. But the massive data transfer was already 100% complete. She instantly called Marcus Ames, her hands shaking. "We've got a massive, catastrophic problem." His voice crackled through static on the line. "How bad is it?" "Someone else currently has the yacht footage," she hissed into the phone. "I need you to delete every single digital trace of it. Every cloud backup. Right now." There was a very long, terrifying silence on the line. Then, Marcus said, incredibly quietly, "It's entirely too late, Sloane. Someone has already leaked it to a secure IP address located in Geneva." Sloane completely froze. Geneva. Nora. For the very first time in this entire Twisted game. True. Paralyzing fear, not. Just manageable guilt, seeped coldly through her veins. Meanwhile, Nora stood peacefully by her hospital window, watching the majestic, snow-capped Alps glowing faintly under the bright moonlight. She gently touched her stomach and whispered, "You will absolutely be born into the truth, not into their lies." Then, her burner phone vibrated violently. A blocked, unknown number flashed menacingly across the screen. She hesitated, but finally answered it. She heard a low, raspy, male voice she absolutely didn't recognize. "Miss Leon, this is your one and only warning. Stop digging into the past, or your children will absolutely never see the daylight." The line instantly went dead with a click. The phone violently slipped from Nora's trembling hand and hit the hard hospital floor with a loud, hollow crack. For a terrifying heartbeat, she literally couldn't move a single muscle. The anonymous, threatening voice replayed endlessly in her mind like a demonic curse. "Stop digging, or your children will never see daylight." Her resting pulse violently spiked into the red zone. The sensitive fetal monitor beside her bed instantly began to scream a high-pitched alarm as both of the twins' heart rates plunged dangerously low. Dr. Marchand burst violently through the door, flanked immediately by 3 frantic nurses. "Move. Move now. She's going into severe distress." Nora gasped loudly for air, aggressively clutching her stomach as a blinding, sharp pain ripped viciously right through her core. The entire room violently blurred into absolute chaos, latex gloves snapping loudly, monitors shrieking, urgent medical voices overlapping rapidly in both French and English. Dr. Marchand gripped her sweating hand tightly. "Listen to me very carefully. Nora, you absolutely must stay awake with us. We are rapidly losing one twins. Oxygen flow. I need to perform an emergency laser ablation procedure right now to save them." "Do it," Nora whispered weakly, hot tears streaming rapidly down her pale temples. Within agonizing minutes, she was aggressively rushed down the hall and into the freezing, bright surgical suite. A blindingly bright surgical spotlight bathed her face as Dr. Marchand expertly inserted the microscopic scope. "We are currently sealing the primary connecting blood vessel," the doctor said, incredibly softly, her professional voice as steady as steel. Nora's consciousness violently wavered on the edge of darkness. She heard the complex machines beep rapidly and murmured weakly into her oxygen mask. "Please, just save them. Take absolutely anything from me. Just save them." The bright room suddenly fell completely silent, except for the rhythmic, mechanical hiss of the life support machines. Then, incredibly slowly, the erratic monitors finally evened out. Too small, fragile heartbeats returned to the screen, steady, strong, and incredibly defiant. Against the odds. Hours later, Nora awoke slowly in the quiet, Dim recovery room. Feeling incredibly pale and physically trembling. Dr. Marchand sat patiently beside her. Bed. Deep exhaustion was plainly visible in the doctor's eyes, but immense. Relief shone brightly in her tired smile. They're completely stable. You successfully did it, the doctor said warmly. But you absolutely must rest now. Any severe emotional or physical stress right now could completely undo everything we just fixed. Nora nodded very faintly. Her entire body felt incredibly hollow and bruised. But her inner spirit had significantly hardened into diamond. Someone actively threatened the lives of my children today, she said incredibly quietly. Her eyes dark. The doctor frowned deeply in concern. Then we will instantly tighten all hospital security. Absolutely no visitors will be allowed without my personal authorization. Do you understand me? Yes, Nora whispered gratefully. And doctor? Thank you for everything. When Dr. Marchand finally left the room, Nora slowly turned her head toward the window. A beautiful, golden dawn was finally breaking over the city of Geneva, casting soft pink and gold light over the snowy peaks of the Alps. The city outside seemed incredibly calm, but she intimately knew much better. Somewhere out there in the dark, Sloane Park, or whoever dangerous fixer she'd hired, had actively tried to permanently silence her. She slowly opened her laptop and typed a highly encrypted message directly to Maya Patel. Threat received. Twins miraculously survived surgery. Proceed with the plan very carefully. Minutes later, Maya replied with a single, shocking image. It was a formal New York court docket. It clearly showed Nora's divorce to Adrian officially closed and finalized, and the marriage certificate of Adrian Kane and Sloane Park filed legally on the exact same day. Beneath the image was a quick note from Maya. I found this buried deep in legal discovery. You never saw it. Call me as soon as you are safe. Nora exhaled a long, shaky breath. Of course she intentionally timed it that exact way, she muttered bitterly. Meanwhile, back in Manhattan, Sloane sat tensely in her sprawling penthouse office, the glittering city sprawling endlessly beneath her feet. Her secure phone buzzed. A private number flashed. It was Marcus Ames. Is it finally done? She asked coldly. He hesitated. Define done. Her tone instantly turned icy. The verbal warning was successfully delivered? Good, she snapped impatiently. And the digital footage? Marcus hesitated again, sounding incredibly nervous. That's significantly more complicated. Someone out there already has multiple backups. The cloud sync hit several different international IPs. Sloane's jaw clenched furiously. Then aggressively scrub it. All of it. I absolutely don't care what it costs me to do it. I'm already trying to, Marcus said defensively. But if the Geneva servers are actively involved, you might already be way too late. Sloane ended the call violently without another word, staring blankly at her own reflection in the thick floor-to-ceiling glass. Beneath her flawless, expensive surface makeup, very faint, terrifying cracks were beginning to rapidly form. Back in Geneva, Nora reached slowly into her bedside drawer and pulled out a small, fresh notebook. On the very first blank page, she wrote one single, powerful word, truth. Under it, she methodically listed the names of her enemies: Sloane Park, Marcus, Ames, Kane Quantum. Her pale hand trembled slightly from the surgery, but her dark eyes burned with absolute, unyielding purpose. You maliciously tried to erase my entire existence, she murmured to the list. But I am still very much here. She heard a very soft, polite knock at the heavy door. It was Dr. Marchand. Again, proudly holding two fresh, clear ultrasound images. Would you finally like to see them clearly? The doctor asked warmly. Nora smiled a weak, beautiful smile as happy tears immediately welled in her eyes. The image clearly showed two tiny, perfect forms curled safely together in the dark, undeniably alive. Yes, she whispered fiercely. I will absolutely fight for them, whatever it takes. As she finally drifted safely back into a deep, healing sleep, fresh snow began to gently fall outside the window, beautifully blanketing the city of Geneva in pure silence. But back in New York, miles away across the ocean, Sloane Park's highly paid IT consultant nervously plugged the supposedly stolen flash drive into his massive computer array and completely froze in terror at the main file title. st_tropez_part_2.mp4. The eerie blue glow of the massive computer monitor bathed the dark, sprawling Manhattan penthouse in an unnatural, cold light. Sloane Park leaned aggressively forward in her leather chair, her expensive glass of Chardonnay sitting entirely untouched on the desk. On the bright screen, the highly encrypted video file labeled st_tropez_part_2.mp4 began to play. A very shaky, hidden phone camera clearly showed the dark inside of a dim, concrete parking garage. Marcus Ames, the exact same sleazy PR fixer, was standing nervously by a silver Bentley, constantly looking over his shoulder. Sloane appeared on the screen mere seconds later, ridiculously wearing oversized, dark designer sunglasses, even though it was clearly the middle of the night. She impatiently reached into her expensive designer purse and pulled out a small, dark velvet pouch. The recorded audio crackled slightly, but Sloane's cold voice was unmistakable. This is the rest of the payment. Make absolutely sure the clinic permanently deletes every single medical record featuring Nora Leighton's name. Marcus nodded, glancing around the empty garage nervously. You're literally asking for federal medical forgery. Sloane, that's a massive federal crime. She smiled on the video, a completely cold, calculating, and highly deliberate smile. It's just aggressive damage control. The stupid world only believes exactly what we tell them to believe. She casually tossed him the velvet pouch, a heavy, expensive gold Rolex watch. clinked loudly inside it. Marcus's hand visibly trembled as he quickly pocketed the bribe. "Consider that extra motivation to get it done today," she said dismissively. The damning video abruptly cut to black. Sloane exhaled a long, incredibly shaky breath, staring horrified at her own pale reflection in the dark, blank screen. Her manicured hands were freezing cold, despite the luxurious warmth of the heated room. "Who the hell actually filmed this?" she whispered into the silence. Behind her, the millions of city lights flickered like restless, angry stars. Suddenly, her burner phone vibrated loudly on the glass desk. It was a text. Message from a completely unknown, blocked number. "You absolutely can't bury everything forever. Sloane." Her throat tightened painfully. She dialed Marcus Ames's private number. Instantly. "You explicitly told me that all the garage footage was completely destroyed," she shouted the moment he answered. "It absolutely was," he snapped back, sounding equally panicked. "I personally wiped the main hard drive myself." "Then explain this new video to me," she shouted at the top of her lungs. "Someone is actively playing us both, Marcus, and I absolutely will not go down for this alone." There was a very long, terrified silence on the line. Then, Marcus let out a low, defeated sigh. "You always arrogantly said that absolutely no one ever needs to know the real truth. Well, maybe the truth is finally finding you." Sloane violently hurled her phone completely across the massive room. The glass screen shattering loudly into a million pieces against the Italian marble floor. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in peaceful Geneva, the harsh hospital lights were finally dimmed to a calm evening mode. Nora sat completely upright in her hospital bed, her laptop glowing faintly on the rolling nightstand. She had just finished carefully reading Maya's latest, highly encrypted message. Hard evidence successfully recovered from the clinic servers. Dates were maliciously altered. Patient files were entirely forged. Our inside source officially confirms a direct financial connection to Park PR and Ames Consulting. A legal chain of custody is currently pending. Nora reread the glorious words 3 times to make sure they were real. Proof. She finally had undeniable proof. But having proof absolutely wasn't the same thing as having safety. Not yet. Dr. Marchand entered the room incredibly quietly. "You're still awake. You really should be resting, Nora." "I will rest soon," Nora said incredibly softly, closing the laptop. "I'm just making absolutely sure my children will actually have a safe world to come into." The kind doctor smiled gently. "They are absolute fighters, just like their mother." When the heavy door clicked closed, Nora unlocked her phone and scrolled slowly through her old personal photos. There was a picture of her and Sloane laughing genuinely together in Central Park, wearing matching winter scarves, hot coffee, cups in hand. "How on earth did you ever turn into this monster?" she murmured sadly to the screen. "When exactly did your blind ambition start costing innocent lives?" Her secure email pinged again. It was a message from Rafael Ortiz. The highly skilled, retired NYPD officer Maya had quietly hired for elite cyber investigation. We successfully traced the entire payment trail. Park PR illegally transferred exactly $250,000 to a shell account owned by Ames Consulting exactly 3 days after the clinic's digital record edit. The timestamp is verified. You were completely set up. Nora's dark eyes filled with exhausted tears. She simply didn't have the physical energy to wipe away. You took my good name, my marriage, and my peace of mind, she whispered fiercely into the quiet room. But you absolutely will not ever take my children. She meticulously backed up every single recovered file onto 3 separate, highly encrypted cloud servers, 1 hidden physical drive, and sent 1 final, massive data dump directly to Lena Ortiz, a Pulitzer-winning investigative journalist at the New York Times. She titled the explosive folder simply, "The Absolute Truth About Sloan Park." Across the Atlantic, Sloan frantically poured herself another massive glass of expensive wine, desperately trying to calm her violently shaking hands. She turned back to her glowing laptop and nervously opened her public calendar. It was completely full of high-profile charity galas, fake press appearances, and endless staged smiles. Then, something entirely new caught her paranoid eye. It was an unfamiliar, strange folder sitting on her desktop that absolutely hadn't been there 10 minutes before. It was ominously named Vault_Sync_Auto-Upload. She clicked it with trembling fingers. The large screen instantly filled with dozens of thumbnail previews of absolutely every single incriminating, illegal video she'd ever secretly made or received. Her stomach violently dropped through the floor. Oh my God! At that exact same moment, in her small, quiet hospital room, Nora whispered lovingly to the sleeping twins safe inside her, "They honestly think I'm incredibly weak. They have absolutely no idea what a determined mother can really do." And exactly as if the universe were actively answering her fierce vow, her phone lit up brightly with a notification. Incoming call, Graham Sterling. The loud, persistent ringtone completely shattered the peaceful silence of the hospital room. Nora jolted violently awake, still half-trapped in a stressful dream, one hand instinctively flying to rest protectively on her belly. The bright caller ID clearly read Graham Sterling. Her resting pulse instantly quickened. She answered it, her voice groggy with sleep. "Graham?" "Don't panic," he said immediately, his tone incredibly clipped and urgent. "But something massive is moving incredibly fast online right now. Someone located in Geneva maliciously leaked your private patient file to the press." Nora sat bolt upright in bed, suddenly wide awake. "What? How is that even possible?" "I don't know the source yet," he continued rapidly, "but major gossip blogs all over New York are already posting massive headlines. Billionaires disgraced. Ex-wife pregnant in secret Swiss hospital. It is absolutely everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. They even have your specific hospital's initials published. Her blood instantly turned ice cold. She swung her legs off the edge of the hospital bed. My children. They'll turn my innocent children into a media circus. You need to stay incredibly calm, Graham warned her sternly. Dr. Marchand is already aggressively tightening physical security on your floor. I am personally handling the media containment strategy stateside, but you absolutely cannot publicly respond. Not a single statement. Do not engage. Understood, Nora said incredibly softly, though her dry throat burned with suppressed rage. Across the Atlantic, Adrian Kane stared blankly at his cell phone screen in absolute, utter disbelief. His highly important executive board meeting completely froze mid-sentence as a junior executive nervously read the top trending headline aloud to the room. Adrian Kane's ex-wife expecting twins in secret Switzerland clinic. The elite board members exchanged highly uncomfortable glances, entirely unsure whether to speak or remain silent. Adrian rose abruptly from his leather chair, his face pale. I'll be right back. He stepped quickly out into the quiet, glass-walled hallway, frantically dialing Sloane's number. She answered smoothly on the very first ring. Her voice, sickeningly, sugary sweet. Adrian, darling, I just saw the absolute nonsense trending online. Please, don't tell me you actually believe any of it. Is it actually nonsense? He demanded, his voice tight. A very slight pause. Darling, of course it is fake. Someone is just maliciously exploiting your painful past for clicks. I asked you this once before, he said, his voice actually breaking with emotion. Did you illegally interfere with the medical paternity test? Her resulting laughter was incredibly sharp and brittle. Adrian, you're obviously just very tired and stressed. Don't start this ridiculous paranoia. Again. Answer me. Sloane. Another pause, significantly colder and more calculated this time. You're absolutely not seriously suggesting that I'm asking you, he snapped violently. Because if this massive leak is actually true, those might be my own children. A heavy, terrifying silence stretched out on the line. Then, Sloane said entirely, coldly, even if they actually were yours, Adrian, the world absolutely does not need another messy, public scandal right now. Think of the company's valuation. Think of our perfect, curated image. He exhaled incredibly slowly, a horrifying realization dawning on him. Our image, or yours? Before she could even attempt to reply with another lie, he hung up the phone. Back in Geneva, Nora stood quietly by the large window, peacefully watching a beautiful, golden dawn creep slowly over the majestic Alps. Her phone continuously buzzed nonstop on the nightstand with incoming messages, greedy reporters, unknown block numbers, and even distant, Opportunistic relatives she hadn't spoken to in years. She turned the device completely off, pressed her hot forehead against the cool glass, and whispered fiercely to the city, "You will absolutely not break me again." Dr. Marchand entered the room incredibly quietly. "We've massively increased your physical security detail. Absolutely no visitors will be allowed on this floor without my direct personal authorization." "Thank you," Nora murmured, turning around. "But the public damage is already done." "Then let the world talk," the wise doctor said firmly. "Your absolute only job right now is to protect those two innocent lives." Later that quiet afternoon, Nora sat comfortably in bed with her laptop open, meticulously composing a deeply personal letter addressed directly to her unborn children. Her honest, raw words poured out onto the screen exactly like a holy confession. "My sweet loves, the cruel world will probably try to tell you that your mother was a massive scandal, but the absolute truth never needs anyone's permission to exist. When you are both finally old enough to understand, you will know that I absolutely never stopped fighting for you, even when the entire world called me crazy." She sealed the digital document with a password, saving it securely under a folder simply titled "For River and Rain." Meanwhile, in a sprawling New York penthouse, Sloane frantically called her massive PR team on speakerphone. "We are legally suing every single media outlet that even dares to mention her name today. I want aggressive cease and desist letters drafted and sent by noon." Her lead assistant hesitated nervously. "But, ma'am, if the twins actually turn out to be his—" "Do not ever finish that sentence," Sloane hissed venomously. "We completely control this story, or we lose absolutely everything." At that exact same moment, Lena Ortiz, the fierce, Pulitzer-winning investigative journalist from the New York Times, was scrolling methodically through her secure inbox when a highly encrypted, anonymous message suddenly arrived. The subject line read simply, "Check W 45th Street Clinic, September 12th. Velvet pouch." She clicked it open with intense curiosity. Attached to the email were incredibly clear, high-resolution still frames pulled directly from security footage. They explicitly showed Sloane Park and Marcus Ames exchanging bribes in the clinic's dim parking garage. Lena's pulse raced with journalistic adrenaline. She leaned back in her desk chair, whispering in awe, "Oh, Sloane, what on earth did you do?" Back in the safety of Geneva, Nora finally drifted into a deep, fragile sleep. The medical machines hummed softly and reassuringly around her. Outside her quiet room, a young nurse absent-mindedly scrolled through her phone, her curiosity heavily piqued by the day's explosive gossip. She completely didn't notice the tall man in a heavy black coat standing perfectly still at the far end of the long corridor, intensely watching the heavy wooden door clearly marked N. Leon. He slowly turned away into the shadows, pulling out a burner phone, and texted, One single, chilling line: she is still alive in the room, awaiting your next instructions. The massive newsroom at the New York Times buzzed frantically like a kicked beehive. Desk phones rang incessantly. Industrial printers clicked loudly. And hundreds of computer screens glowed brightly with rapid breaking updates about Nora Leighton's mysterious reappearance in Switzerland. At her highly cluttered, chaotic desk, veteran investigative journalist Lena Ortiz leaned aggressively forward. Her sharp eyes narrowed intensely at the paused video clip from the W45th Street clinic security footage. There she was, undeniably clear on the screen. Sloane Park. She was wearing an expensive designer coat and dark, oversized sunglasses, whispering intently to Marcus Ames, her well-known, shady political fixer. The small, dark velvet pouch exchanged hands in the dim, concrete garage exactly as the anonymous email had described. Lena expertly froze the frame exactly at 2014 and heavily magnified the image. The digital timestamp perfectly matched the massive offshore payment record she'd independently uncovered just hours earlier. She exhaled a long, slow breath of pure triumph. Got you. Her senior editor, a gruff, no-nonsense man named Terrence, suddenly appeared. Over her shoulder, holding a mug of coffee. You're actually still digging on that messy Kane corporate scandal. Lena nodded, her eyes glued to the screen. Terrence, there is significantly more than just a messy tabloid scandal here. This is massive, federal level, criminal fabrication. We're talking forged medical records, corporate bribery, and maybe something infinitely worse. Terrence frowned deeply, crossing his arms. You've got to absolutely lock down your sources on this, Lena. We absolutely cannot publish a word if it's just angry ex-wife rumor. It's absolutely not a rumor, Lena said, her voice hardening with absolute certainty. It's the undeniable truth. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in Geneva, the sterile hospital hallways were eerily, unnervingly quiet. Nora woke slowly to the steady, rhythmic drip of her and the comforting, soft hum of the life support machinery. A new, unfamiliar nurse was quietly replacing her saline bag when Nora suddenly noticed something incredibly strange. Her mandatory hospital security badge had changed color. That's a new color, Nora said, her voice half suspicious, her instincts flaring. The nurse smiled, a very nervous, tight smile, avoiding eye contact. It's just our updated security protocol, Miss Leighton. Strictly for your safety. But when the nurse quickly left the room, Nora's survival instincts absolutely screamed at her. She had pulled the badge closer to inspect it while the woman leaned over. It wasn't the standard hospital's design. Someone had meticulously switched it out. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm. She immediately got up, locked her heavy room door, and then frantically opened her laptop. A highly encrypted email notification blinked brightly from Maya. We've Successfully. Legally confirmed the massive transfer from Park PR to Ames. Consulting. Raphael also says the encrypted drive was copied to multiple global servers before its deletion. We officially have absolutely everything. Nora's eyes widened in sheer relief. Everything, she whispered into the quiet room. Then, another, highly unexpected message popped up. This one was from Lena Ortiz herself. Miss Leon, my name is Lena Ortiz. I am an investigative journalist from the New York Times. I am currently verifying massive, hard evidence legally linking Sloan Park to document forgery and possible federal medical fraud. I firmly believe you were her primary target. I'd very much like to protect your side of the narrative before the massive story breaks globally. May I please call you? Nora hesitated for a long moment, her shaking hand hovering over the glowing keyboard. If she replied and confirmed her identity, she'd permanently expose her location and invite the media chaos. But if she didn't, Sloan would undoubtedly continue spinning her toxic narrative unchecked. Finally, taking a deep breath, she typed, "Call me tomorrow morning. I'll give you the absolute truth." Across the ocean, Lena aggressively refreshed her inbox and smiled a faint, victorious smile. Tomorrow it is. At that very same moment, Sloan Park sat alone in her massive, candlelit penthouse, frantically scrolling through devastating damage reports from her elite PR firm. Engagement was dropping by 18%. One assistant desperately reported, "Major investors are growing incredibly nervous about the massive reputational risk." Sloan forced a brittle, fake smile to her empty room. "We'll easily fix it with a sympathetic charity angle." The Kane Foundation rapidly expands its scope to help poor mothers in crisis. Draft something emotional by morning. Marcus Ames called in, his voice incredibly low, raspy, and panicked. "Sloan, you absolutely don't understand the gravity of this. There is a ruthless Times reporter actively digging into the clinic right now. Ortiz. She has the actual garage footage." Sloan's tone went instantly, terrifyingly icy. "Then physically handle it. Marcus. Illegally delete her hard drive. Heavily bribe her source. I don't care. Do whatever it takes." "I literally can't," Marcus said incredibly quietly, sounding defeated. "The files are already completely mirrored through the Times secure, encrypted cloud servers. You absolutely can't erase a digital paper trail that's significantly older than your lies." The line went completely dead. Sloan stared blankly out the massive window, the iconic Manhattan skyline shimmering beautifully in the distance. For the very first time in her life, her own cold reflection genuinely frightened her. In Geneva, Nora leaned heavily back against her soft pillow, utter exhaustion finally dragging her under into sleep. She dreamed vividly of two tiny, perfect hands reaching for the light, of cool, rushing water breaking over smooth rocks. of absolute safety. Then, her phone vibrated loudly. It was one urgent message from Lena Ortiz. I just got secondary. On the record confirmation from Graham Sterling. He's absolutely ready to go on the record if you are. And directly below it, a final, terrifying sentence from Graham that made Nora's blood run completely ice cold. Your hospital's internal security network has just been compromised. Someone is actively trying to illegally access your room file. Nora's eyes flew wide open. The long hallway outside her door was absolutely silent. Entirely too silent. She frantically reached for the emergency call button on her bed. But the line was completely dead. Nothing happened. A dark, heavy shadow moved slowly beneath the crack of her door, and a very quiet, metallic click echoed loudly in the silence. It was the sound of the heavy lock slowly turning from the outside. The metallic click echoed again, soft, deliberate, and terrifying. Nora's pulse thundered so loudly in her ears it drowned out the hum of the machines. She slid silently off the high hospital bed, barefoot on the cold linoleum, one hand placed fiercely and protectively over her belly. The overhead room lights suddenly flickered and died. Outside her room, the bright hallway light dimmed significantly, replaced only by a faint, eerie red glow from the distant nurse's emergency station. Someone was definitely out there. The heavy door handle turned exactly once, a slow, testing, methodical motion. Then, a low, unnervingly calm voice whispered through the crack in the door. Miss Leon? Are you currently awake? She froze completely. It absolutely wasn't Dr. Marchand, and it wasn't any nurse. She recognized from her rotation. The male voice was far too calm, entirely too polite to be a regular medical check-in at this hour. Operating purely on adrenaline, Nora grabbed the absolute nearest heavy object, a thick, crystal flower vase, and held it up tightly like a lethal weapon. Who's out there? She demanded, her voice shaking but loud. There was absolutely no answer. The heavy shadow beneath the door shifted and moved again, slowly retreating, followed by the faint sound of heavy, rubber-soled footsteps quickly fading down the hall. Silence heavily returned to the room. Nora exhaled a long, incredibly shaky breath, leaning against the wall for support. She frantically hit the red emergency button again. Still completely dead. They had systematically cut the main power to her specific rooms. Communication line. Primal panic violently clawed at her chest, but she forcefully forced herself to think clearly. Whoever the man was, he thankfully hadn't gotten inside yet. Suddenly, the heavy door violently burst open. Nora flinched, raising the heavy glass vase to strike, then completely froze in relief. It was Dr. Marchand, looking completely breathless and holding a small, sealed envelope. You're perfectly safe, she said incredibly quickly, locking the door behind her. Someone illegally tampered with the hospital's internal security network. Our armed security team is handling it right now. Someone was just standing right outside my door, Nora whispered, lowering the vase, her hands shaking. I know, the doctor said grimly. He's completely gone now. The backup security cameras caught him quickly leaving through the restricted side entrance. The Geneva police are already on their way. Nora sank heavily back onto the edge of the bed, her entire body physically trembling with adrenaline. He was definitely here to physically hurt me. Dr. Marchand gently handed her the sealed envelope. This mysteriously arrived via secure courier an hour ago, directly from the United States consulate. I originally thought it could wait until morning, but given the circumstances, maybe it shouldn't. Nora opened the heavy envelope incredibly slowly. Inside was a very small, elegant velvet box. Her racing heart stilled completely as she lifted the lid. It was her original diamond wedding ring, but it was significantly different. The massive, flawless diamond was completely gone. In its place, a beautiful, tiny gold star charm hung delicately from a brand new, sturdy chain. Beneath the necklace was a small note written in incredibly familiar, steady handwriting. You absolutely do not owe him the pain of your past. You only owe yourself a beautiful future. MP. Maya. Nora's eyes instantly filled with hot, grateful tears. For the very first time in agonizing months, someone absolutely wasn't asking her to be strong or asking her to fight a war. They were gently, beautifully reminding her that she was fully capable of rebuilding her own life. Dr. Marchand smiled a very soft, understanding smile. You clearly have very loyal friends who care incredibly deeply for you. Yes, Nora whispered, clutching the star charm. And my enemies are rapidly running out of time. Later that exact same morning, she was officially discharged from the hospital, but strictly under heavy bed rest orders. Graham Sterling had flawlessly arranged for a highly private, secure flat located right near Lake Geneva, a stunning, quiet space with incredibly thick walls and round-the-clock, armed, private security. Nora stepped inside the beautiful flat and physically felt the profound stillness wrap comfortingly around her like a fragile, sacred promise. When she finally turned on the soft living room light, Graham was already there, waiting for her, sitting patiently on the plush sofa in a sharp, charcoal suit. You look surprisingly alive, he said gently, standing up. I am, she replied, taking off her coat. Barely. He stood, setting a thick, heavy folder down on the coffee table. I urgently need to show you something, Nora, and I desperately need you to remain completely calm when you see it. Inside the folder was a clean, printed copy of a standard non-compete clause, the exact employment contract she'd signed years ago while originally working as a developer for Kane Quantum. Her familiar signature sat neatly next to a completely new line she'd absolutely never seen before. All intellectual property developed by the signee to be officially credited under AIN Holdings. That's my proprietary algorithm, Nora said incredibly slowly. Her eyes widening in horror as she read the technical jargon. That is the exact predictive model I personally wrote during the early beta tests. Yes, Graham said grimly. It is the exact same model that entirely built the company's current multi-billion-dollar market valuation. Her stomach violently turned with nausea. He actually stole it from me. He let someone else steal it for him, Graham corrected her accurately. Sloan explicitly drafted this highly illegal contract amendment right after your initial separation. It fraudulently transferred every single patent you created directly under Adrian's name. Nora's voice trembled, a potent, volatile mix of deep heartbreak and unadulterated fury. So, while I was literally bleeding for his corporate dream, they successfully erased my entire existence on paper. Graham nodded slowly. They did. But you can absolutely get it all back. There is a massive, glaring legal loophole. If you are still legally identified as a major contributor when the twins are officially born, you can easily, legally, reclaim total authorship. She stared out the massive window at the dark lake, the white snow falling silently like ash over a fire. Then I'll absolutely claim it, she said incredibly quietly, her voice like steel. Not for petty revenge. For my legacy. Graham studied her fierce expression, then said, There's just one more thing you need to see. He slid a glossy photograph across the table. It was a clear shot of Sloan at a recent New York gala, proudly arm in arm with Marcus Ames. They're aggressively tightening their inner circle. Whatever massive move you're planning, Nora, you must move fast. Nora slowly traced the edge of the photograph with her finger. Oh, I will, she said softly. But absolutely not yet. The arrogant think I'm still hiding in fear. Let them think it. She glanced down at the beautiful star charm resting against her neck. A faint, dangerous smile finally touching her lips. When I finally return to New York, I want the entire world watching. Outside in the freezing cold, completely unseen in the dark, a high-powered camera lens focused intently through the falling snow directly on her window, silently recording every single word she said. Snow drifted like fine, powdered glass outside the large windows of Nora's secure apartment. The entire world outside was peacefully quiet, but her racing mind was an absolute, raging storm. The damning legal documents Graham had left lay aggressively scattered across the dining table. Forged contracts, internal corporate emails, and illegal transfer memos, each and every page serving as undeniable hard proof that her very name had been systematically erased from the brilliant invention that had built Kane Quantum's billion-dollar valuation. Her encrypted phone suddenly buzzed on the table. It was Maya Patel, her brilliant attorney and oldest, most trusted friend. Please tell me you've actually looked through the files, Maya said urgently. Entirely without preamble. I have, Nora answered. Her voice was incredibly steady, but her hands physically trembled as she touched the papers. It's absolutely all there, Maya. The predictive model. The complex algorithm that tracks user behavior. My original code. My name was completely deleted, and Sloane's initials were proudly stamped next to every single major revision. She literally stole total credit for your life's work, Maya confirmed. Her tone laced with disgust. And she aggressively used that stolen model to massively boost Kane Quantum's initial public offering. Without your code, Adrian's company would have easily been worth less than half its current value. Nora stared blankly at the thick snow falling heavily outside, each white flake feeling like a slow, agonizing countdown of betrayal. Do you truly realize what this means, Maya? They didn't just maliciously take my husband. They actively, legally took my entire identity. On the other end of the line, Maya's professional tone softened significantly. Then we aggressively take it back, Nora. Legally, and highly publicly. Nora hesitated, looking toward the nursery. That massive lawsuit will permanently expose the twins to the media. Not if we expertly control the narrative first, Maya countered confidently. I am officially filing an emergency intellectual property reinstatement injunction. Tomorrow, you will absolutely need to testify in federal court once you are medically cleared to travel. But Nora, there's something else. What is it? Maya's voice lowered into a serious whisper. Raphael expertly traced a massive hidden payment from Park PR directly to Ames Consulting. It was for $250,000. Wired exactly one day after the clinic incident. It's hush money. Nora completely froze. Blood money. Exactly, Maya said. And he also managed to find highly deleted internal emails between Sloane and a corrupt corporate notary, the exact person who handled your fraudulent patent transfer. She explicitly bribed them to illegally falsify the timestamps. We can definitively prove absolutely everything in court. Nora closed her eyes tightly, desperately breathing through the sudden rising nausea in her stomach. You'll officially handle all the legal filings? They're already in motion, Maya said firmly. But Nora, you need to understand something. This is vastly more than just a revenge plot. This is an all-out war. Once we officially expose her crimes, she will come for you. Significantly harder than ever before. Let her, Nora whispered fiercely into the phone. I've got absolutely nothing left to lose. In New York, at that exact same moment, Sloane Park sat arrogantly in her massive corner office overlooking the East River. The bright light from the sprawling city glinted off her massive, flawless diamond wedding band as she impatiently scrolled through a text message thread with Adrian. He hadn't responded to her in 3 agonizing days. His very last cryptic message simply read, I'm going to Geneva. She violently slammed her silver laptop shut. Pure. Unadulterated rage bubbling dangerously beneath her polished designer surface. If he actually goes to her, absolutely everything we built unravels. Her terrified young assistant poked her head timidly into the office. Mrs. Kane? The board desperately wants to finalize next quarter's PR presentation. Today, Sloane forced a brilliant, completely fake smile. Please tell them I am, unfortunately, unavailable. It's a severe family emergency. When the assistant quickly left, she immediately locked the door and called Marcus Ames. She's apparently still alive, Marcus said bluntly, offering no pleasantries. And she absolutely has secure backups of everything, even your clinic video. Sloane's tone became razor-sharp and lethal. Then you leak something terrible on her. Anything you can find or make up. Make her look completely unstable to the public. Marcus hesitated, sounding defeated. That might be incredibly difficult now. Sloane. She's got very powerful allies. Graham Sterling is officially involved. Sloane went sickly pale. The billionaire investor? Yeah, Marcus said grimly. And the loud rumor downtown is that he's actively advising her entire legal team. If he actually testifies against you, you're completely done. Her voice dropped to a terrifying whisper. Then I'll just have to make absolutely sure he doesn't. Back in Geneva, Nora calmly set down her phone and opened her laptop. She began rapidly typing out her entire story. Every single betrayal, every falsified medical record, every stolen, brilliant idea. But this document absolutely wasn't meant for the hungry press. It was meant exclusively for her children. When you are both finally old enough to read this, please know that your mother absolutely didn't run away. She stayed and fought them with the only real weapons she had, absolute truth and time. A soft knock suddenly sounded on her apartment door. She tensed up instantly, then visibly relaxed when she heard a familiar, comforting voice. It's just Graham. He stepped inside the warm apartment, carrying a fragrant, warm bag of takeout, food and a cautious, gentle smile. You've clearly been working all night. War absolutely doesn't wait for morning, she said, half smiling, accepting the food. He placed a heavy, encrypted USB drive gently on the table. This is Raphael's full legal chain of custody report. Every single deleted file has been successfully verified. It's completely airtight for court. Nora stared intensely at the drive, a brilliant glint of fierce determination lighting up her tired eyes. Then we're officially ready. Graham hesitated for a long moment, then asked incredibly quietly, Do you honestly still love him, Nora? She looked down, gently tracing the gold star charm resting against her neck. I loved exactly who I thought he was. But love absolutely doesn't ever excuse silence. He nodded slowly in deep understanding. Then let's make some serious noise. Nora smiled a faint, dangerous smile. Oh, Graham. We're going to make absolute thunder. Across the dark ocean, Sloane Park's phone suddenly buzzed on her desk with a single, devastating text from Adrian. I'm leaving you tonight. And for the very first time in her life, Sloane terrifyingly realized that her perfect Stolen Empire was completely cracking from within. Snow whipped aggressively across the freezing Geneva tarmac. As the luxurious private jet's massive engines slowly cooled, Adrian Kane stepped out onto the slick, icy ground, his expensive overcoat whipping wildly in the bitter wind. He honestly hadn't slept a single wink in 40 agonizing hours. Every single mile traveled between New York and Switzerland had felt like a slow, excruciating punishment, endlessly replaying every single terrible choice that had ultimately led him here. The suffocating silence in his marriage, the blind, cowardly betrayal, the lavish wedding to Sloane he absolutely never should have had. The sleek black car waiting patiently for him on the tarmac belonged directly to Graham Sterling. The silent driver handed him a small piece of paper with an address, just one single line, Rue du Lac 14. Adrian's pale hands trembled very slightly as he hastily typed the address into his phone's GPS. He didn't actually need directions. He intuitively knew exactly where she was hiding. 20 tense minutes later, he stood alone outside the modest, beautiful stone building. There were no flashing paparazzi cameras, no imposing security guards, just one heavy wooden door standing between him and the incredible woman he'd so profoundly failed. He knocked twice. Inside the apartment, Nora completely froze. She intimately knew the cadence of that specific knock. For a terrifying moment, she literally couldn't move a muscle. Her body reacted violently before her logical mind could catch up. She looked down at her loose, comfortable sweater stretched tight over her belly, her undeniable, visible truth. When she finally opened the door, she absolutely didn't remove the heavy metal security chain. Adrian stood there in the cold hallway. He looked significantly thinner than she remembered. His blue eyes were heavily bloodshot, and his entire expression was incredibly raw and vulnerable. For once in his life, there was absolutely no corporate arrogance, no polished, weaponized charm. There was just a broken man, entirely stripped bare. "Nora," he breathed, his voice cracking. "You look—" "Don't," she said incredibly quietly, cutting him off. "Don't use that word. Not after absolutely everything." He nodded quickly, stepping back submissively as if creating physical distance could somehow magically undo the massive damage. "I honestly didn't know where else to go." "You easily could have just gone back home to your wife," she said, her voice dripping with cold disdain. He gave a very small, incredibly broken laugh. "That place isn't home anymore." A heavy, suffocating silence stretched out between them. The freezing winter wind howled loudly outside the building, exactly like an old, angry ghost, stubbornly refusing to die. Finally, she spoke again. "What exactly do you want, Adrian?" His voice violently cracked with emotion. "I just wanted to see you. To ask if it's actually true." His desperate eyes flicked downwards toward her swelling belly. "If they're really mine." She interrupted him instantly. That's absolutely all that matters to you. He swallowed hard, fighting tears. Please, Nora. I desperately need to know. After a very long, agonizing moment, she slowly unlatched the heavy chain and stepped aside to let him in. Then come inside and listen. But you absolutely do not get to talk until I'm completely done. He entered the warm apartment incredibly quietly. The cozy space smelled faintly of calming chamomile tea and cold winter air. Stacks of printed papers completely covered the coffee table, legal drafts, forged medical forms, stolen corporate contracts. Her entire war against him, meticulously mapped out in black ink. I very nearly died last week, she began, her voice unwavering. They officially call it twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome. The emergency laser surgery miraculously saved them. Barely. While you were busy marrying my former best friend in a lavish ceremony, I was lying on an operating table, desperately praying for 2 tiny heartbeats to just stay alive. Adrian's eyes glistened with hot, horrified tears. I honestly didn't know anything about that. Sloane explicitly told me you. She told you I ended the pregnancy, Nora cut in sharply. And you, like a coward, blindly believed her. He lowered his head in deep shame. I desperately wanted to ask you. I actively tried to send in the paternity test, but she said it would completely destroy everything we had built. The upcoming IPO, the volatile press, the entire company's valuation. The company? Nora repeated. Pure. Unadulterated bitterness slicing cleanly through her voice. You actively chose your fake empire over your own family. He stepped closer, looking incredibly desperate. I chose completely wrong. Nora. I clearly see that now. Nora's breath trembled slightly. For a brief, heartbreaking heartbeat, the room was entirely still. They were just 2 broken people standing amidst the smoking wreckage of what was once a beautiful love. Do you even begin to understand exactly what you took from me? She whispered. Fiercely. My good name. My life's work. My basic human dignity. Adrian nodded rapidly, his tears finally spilling over. Yes. I do. And I swear. To you. I will actively spend the absolute rest of my life giving it all back to you. Piece by piece. Nora stared deeply at him, actively searching his ruined face for any trace of true sincerity. Slowly, deliberately, she reached out and placed his trembling hand directly on her stomach. A small, distinct flutter responded instantly from within. Adrian gasped loudly, a choked, ugly sob catching violently in his throat. Hi, he whispered brokenly to her stomach. I'm your very, very late dad. Nora's voice softened just a fraction, but her dark eyes stayed incredibly hard. If you truly want to be their father, Adrian, then you must start with the absolute truth. You go out there and you tell the entire world exactly what you did to me. What she did, he corrected her softly. He nodded firmly. I will do it. Then go right now, she said, before she even realizes you're permanently gone. Outside in the cold, his driver waited patiently as Adrian climbed heavily into the back of the car. He immediately called Graham Sterling. Please prepare a formal press statement, he said, his voice hard. Sloan. Park's reign of terror officially ends tomorrow morning. Back in Manhattan, Sloane's phone buzzed loudly on her lighted vanity. She lazily opened her tracking app and completely froze in terror. Adrian's GPS location blinked brightly, thousands of miles away across the ocean. Her arrogant smile completely vanished. He's in Geneva, she whispered in horror. He's with her. Geneva's morning sky was the exact, depressing color of dull pewter. Incredibly heavy with the imminent promise of more snow. On the small, iron balcony of her secure apartment, Nora wrapped herself tightly in a thick wool blanket and stared blankly down at the frozen, sprawling lake below. The city lights shimmered faintly in the mist, soft, muted, and distant, looking exactly like painful old memories that stubbornly refused to fade away. Inside the warm living room, Adrian Kane stood quietly by the window, watching her intently. He had arrived entirely broken, utterly sleepless, and now, standing here in her modest space, he seemed significantly smaller than the massive, intimidating legend his tech company had so carefully built. You really should sit down, Nora said, not even turning around. The high altitude will definitely get to you if the immense guilt doesn't first. He tried to muster a weak smile, but miserably failed. You always had a very unique way of making genuine mercy sound exactly like cruel punishment. Because you consistently confuse a verbal apology with actual action, she replied, finally turning around to face him. You flew thousands of miles across the world, Adrian. But have you actually fundamentally changed? He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. I'm genuinely trying to. Nora. Trying absolutely won't save you, she said coldly. Only the absolute truth will. He stepped slowly out onto the freezing balcony right beside her. The biting winter wind cut aggressively right through his thin coat. Then I'll gladly give you the absolute truth. All of it. She crossed her arms tightly over her chest. Then start from that night in St. Tropez. His strong jaw tightened visibly. I accidentally overheard Sloane and Marcus arguing that night on the yacht. She told him that you had suddenly become a massive corporate liability, that if the news of your pregnancy leaked to the press, the board would immediately see it as weakness. She explicitly used the word leverage. Nora's breath painfully hitched, a violent tremor of both righteous anger and profound heartbreak. And knowing all of that, you still willingly married her. I was terrified, Adrian admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. The massive IPO was mere days away. She confidently said she could expertly handle the public optics, keep all the nervous investors completely calm. I foolishly Thought I could just fix things quietly with you afterward. You thought completely wrong. He looked miserably out at the dark lake. When I finally realized she had illegally forged your medical file at the clinic, I confronted her about it. She aggressively denied absolutely everything. And then the massive wedding press hit the tabloids, and suddenly I was permanently trapped inside the fake, flawless image she had masterfully built for us. Nora's voice cracked, sounding significantly softer now. You easily could have just called me. One single, honest phone call from you would have changed absolutely everything. I know it would have, he whispered in agony. But I was an absolute coward. I cowardly let her publicly bury you because it was infinitely easier than actually facing my own deep shame. For a very long, agonizing moment, the absolute only sound was the freezing wind, rattling the iron balcony railing. Finally, Nora said incredibly quietly, do you desperately want public redemption, or do you want my forgiveness? He looked at her, genuinely surprised by the question. Is there actually a difference? There is absolutely every difference, she said firmly. Redemption is entirely about exactly what you choose to do next. Forgiveness is entirely about what I personally choose to let go of. You absolutely don't get to have both. Adrian nodded very slowly, accepting his fate. Then I will gladly settle for redemption. Dr. Marchand suddenly appeared in the open doorway, breaking the incredibly heavy silence. Miss Leon, your blood pressure is rapidly rising again. You desperately need to rest. Nora turned sharply toward Adrian. You heard the doctor. Go back to your hotel. I am absolutely not leaving this city until I somehow make this right, he insisted stubbornly. Her voice sharpened into a blade. You absolutely cannot make it right just by standing here feeling sorry for yourself. He hesitated for a second, then stepped forward, gently taking her cold hand. Then please, just tell me exactly what to do. She studied his ruined face for a long moment. Go back home to New York. Immediately fire her sleazy fixer. Securely preserve all the internal board emails. Give my attorney full, unrestricted access to the original patent records. Then, permanently disappear from Sloane's public calendar. She absolutely can't destroy what she can't find. He nodded firmly. Consider it all done. She slowly released his hand. When this is finally over, you will stand up and tell the entire world the absolute truth. Not for my sake, but for theirs. She gestured lovingly toward her pregnant belly. Adrian's bloodshot eyes softened with profound love. I absolutely promise you. He turned heavily toward the door, then paused and looked back at her one absolute last time. You used to constantly say that every great story has a beautiful second act. Is this ours? Nora didn't answer him right away. That entirely depends on exactly how your first act ends, she said incredibly quietly. He finally left the apartment. Nora stayed outside on the freezing balcony, the cold air aggressively biting her pink cheeks. silently watching his cars. Headlights vanish completely into the dark night. Down on the snowy street far below, another luxury car door smoothly opened. A woman stepped out confidently, sleek, perfectly composed. The violent wind aggressively tugging at her perfectly styled dark hair. Sloane Park looked slowly up at the balcony, her cold eyes locked completely on the bright light still burning warmly in Nora's apartment. Her red lips slowly curling into a wicked smile. "Lights on," she murmured to herself. Perfect timing for the cameras. Thick snowflakes swirled wildly around the grand entryway of the building as Sloane Park stepped confidently out of the massive black car, her expensive designer heels clicking loudly on the icy pavement. Right behind her trailed a professional two-man camera crew carrying compact, bright lights and boom microphones cleverly disguised as indie documentary equipment. She gracefully adjusted her luxurious fur-lined coat, expertly pasted on her flawless, sympathetic media smile, and whispered instructions to them. "We're just shooting casual lifestyle footage today. If absolutely anyone asks, it's for an exclusive charity piece." The head cameraman nodded silently. "Understood, Mrs. Kane." From the dark safety of the fourth-floor balcony, Nora Leighton watched the entire bizarre scene unfold below, her rapid breath momentarily fogging the cold glass. Even at this significant distance, she instantly recognized Sloane's terrifying, predatory calm, the exact same chilling expression she'd worn while aggressively betraying her. Dr. Marchand entered the room right behind her. "You really should be lying down, Nora. Your vital signs aren't entirely stable today." "I'm perfectly fine," Nora said tightly, her eyes locked on the street. "But she is officially here, and she clearly brought a full performance with her." Downstairs, Sloane confidently buzzed the building's main intercom. Her voice echoed loudly through the speaker in Nora's apartment. "Nora, darling, it's Sloane. I kindly came all this way just to talk to you. Woman to woman. Let's please end this messy feud properly." Nora's pulse raced wildly. She pressed the intercom button firmly. "And what?" "Exactly, Sloane. The part where you illegally faked my entire medical record? Or the part where you maliciously stole my husband?" "Oh, sweetheart," Sloane purred smoothly into the speaker, her voice absolutely dripping with highly practiced, fake sympathy for the cameras. "You are clearly very unwell. People online are saying such terrible, untrue things about you. Please, just let me come up and help you fix this awful narrative." "The absolute only thing in this world that needs fixing," Nora said incredibly coldly, "is your complete lack of a conscience." She released the button with a click. Upstairs, Dr. Marchand crossed her arms in deep concern. "What exactly is she doing out there?" "She's desperately fishing for an emotional reaction," Nora said, her voice like steel. "But she absolutely won't get one from me. Except..." Sloane wasn't leaving the building. She turned dramatically to the camera. Crew. Whispering. Roll. Then. She significantly raised her voice. Acting. Deeply concerned. You see. Everyone. She is completely unstable. She desperately needs professional medical care. This poor, sick woman genuinely believes in crazy conspiracy theories. The lead cameraman hesitated, looking visibly uncomfortable with the setup. Ma'am, this really doesn't feel right. We shouldn't. Keep filming, she snapped viciously, her mask slipping. Suddenly, a bright, blinding flash from directly across the street caught her. Attention. Another camera. Lena Ortiz, the fierce, Pulitzer-winning New York Times reporter, was methodically documenting the entire humiliating scene from a dark cafe window. She had zoomed in tightly, perfectly capturing Sloane, aggressively shouting at a locked apartment door, her voice rising in panic. Her perfect mask completely slipping off. Inside the safe apartment, Nora watched the entire confrontation unfold on her phone through Lena's highly secure live feed. She smiled a very faint, satisfied smile. Perfect timing, Lena. Meanwhile, back in Manhattan, Maya Patel held a highly secretive meeting with Graham Sterling at the Plaza Hotel's elegant Palm Court. Rafael Ortiz sat quietly beside them, his laptop open, the bright screen glowing with verified digital timestamps and illegal bank records. Maya leaned eagerly forward across the table. This is absolutely everything we need. Everything, Rafael confirmed with a nod. The entire offshore payment trail. The heavily encrypted hard drives. The clinic security footage. And even the original bribe receipts. It is more than enough evidence for the Department of Justice to move in. Graham nodded firmly, adjusting his suit. Then it is officially time we go public. Maya exhaled a long, heavy breath of relief. Nora absolutely deserves to see true justice served, not just basic survival. Back in freezing Geneva, Sloane's fake, sympathetic performance was rapidly unraveling on the street. Her perfect smile cracked significantly under the crushing weight of her own massive lies. The building's burly, uniformed doorman approached her firmly. Madam, I must respectfully ask you to leave the premises immediately. The tenant upstairs has incredibly strict medical restrictions. Sloane turned on him, her eyes blazing with entitlement. Do you have any idea who I actually am? Yes, he said incredibly calmly, completely unfazed. That is exactly why I'm asking you so politely. As she furiously stormed back toward her waiting car, Lena quietly followed at a safe distance, relentlessly snapping dozens of high-resolution photos. She immediately sent a quick, encrypted message to Maya. Sloane Park caught on camera, aggressively harassing patient. Undeniable photos attached. By midnight that night, those highly damaging photos, along with explosive, leaked snippets of the clinic security footage, had successfully reached half The major newsrooms in New York City. Sloane watched helplessly from her luxury hotel suite as devastating headlines rapidly spread like wildfire across Twitter. Kane PR queen faces massive federal medical fraud allegations. Exclusive, the SD. Tropez bribery connection exposed. Her perfectly manicured hands shook violently. No. No. This absolutely isn't happening to me. Marcus Ames called her, his voice frantic. They've got the entire, unredacted, paper trail. Sloane, you need to run. Now. Run, she hissed into the phone, enraged. I single-handedly built this massive empire. Then you can stay and watch it burn to the ground, he said coldly. Right. Before hanging up on her. The very next morning, Geneva's brilliant sunrise painted the serene lake in stunning shades of gold. Nora peacefully sipped her hot tea, feeling utterly exhausted, but profoundly peaceful for the very first time in agonizing months. Her secure phone buzzed. It was a message from Maya. Lena's explosive cover story officially goes live tomorrow morning. You actually did it, Nora. Nora smiled weakly, gently touching her stomach. We're almost entirely free. But entirely outside the building, completely unnoticed, a tall man in a dark gray coat stepped silently from a parked utility van. He held a very small electronic remote in one hand and looked menacingly up at her glowing window, before calmly lighting a cigarette. Mere moments later, the incredibly faint, acrid scent of toxic smoke drifted quietly through the hallway. Hungry, bright orange flames began to greedily lick at the wooden edges of Nora's apartment door. Thick, black smoke violently curled beneath the crack of the apartment door, moving into the room exactly like a living, malicious shadow. At very first, Nora groggily thought it was just a terrible nightmare, the faint, terrifying crackle, the incredibly slow, ominous hiss. But then came the brutal, sharp sting of toxic air invading her lungs. She coughed violently, gasped for clean air, and horrifying reality crashed in on her. Fire! Dr. Marchand screamed hysterically from the hallway outside. Building alarms erupted instantly. Shrill, deafening, and utterly chaotic. Nora desperately tried to stand up, but the immense weight of the twins pressed heavily and painfully against her lungs. The entire room rapidly blurred with thick smoke. She frantically grabbed the emergency go-bag she always kept by her bed. It held her passport, the encrypted flash drives, and the gold star charm, and stumbled blindly toward the large window. Outside in the hallway, massive flames aggressively climbed the wooden stairwell. The entire building's power suddenly flickered and died, plunging them into terrifying darkness. Nora, Dr. Marchand violently burst through the thick smoke, her face heavily covered with a damp towel. The main exits are completely blocked by the fire. We absolutely have to move down the back service corridor right now. Nora wheezed, her lungs burning. Where does it lead? It leads directly out to the loading dock. They half ran, half stumbled blindly through the choking, blinding black haze. Somewhere far below them, brave firefighters were already shouting urgent commands in French. Loud sirens wailed closer and closer, the terrifying sound echoing loudly off the dark lake. A soot-covered paramedic safely caught them at the bottom of the smoky stairwell, aggressively leading them out into the freezing, biting night air. Nora collapsed heavily against the side of the open ambulance door, coughing violently until her blurred vision finally steadied. The babies, she gasped, out in sheer panic. They're completely all right, Dr. Marchand said soothingly, quickly checking the portable fetal monitor firmly strapped to Nora's wrist. They are absolute fighters, just exactly like you. As the firefighters aggressively doused the massive flames with water, one of the investigators approached them with a remarkably grim face. Someone absolutely started this fire deliberately. We just found heavy traces of chemical accelerant poured right near the door. Nora felt absolutely all the remaining blood drain completely from her pale face. She actually did this, she whispered in horror. Sloan did this to me. Hours later at the secure hospital, Nora lay quietly under strict medical observation, wrapped tightly in heated blankets, a clear oxygen mask pressed firmly to her face. Her secure phone vibrated loudly on the table. Maya Patel was calling. Maya, Nora croaked, her throat raw and scratchy from the smoke. Thank God you're actually alive, Maya breathed, her voice shaking with immense relief. We saw the terrifying news reports. The Geneva police have officially confirmed it was targeted arson. You are completely underarmed. Federal protection right now. Do you clearly hear me? Nora's voice was barely a rasp. She's desperately trying to erase my existence. Even now. She is completely failing, Maya said fiercely. Because we officially have absolutely everything we need. Lena's explosive article goes live in exactly 2 hours. But she absolutely wants your final approval on it first. Your official statement. The entire world deeply deserves to hear your true voice. Nora closed her tired eyes. For so incredibly long, absolutely everyone else had told her story for her. Adrian, Sloan, the vicious tabloids. This specific time, it would finally come entirely from her. Put me directly through to her, Nora said firmly. A few seconds later, Lena Ortiz's voice came through the line, incredibly low and steady. Miss Leon, I want you to absolutely know that you don't owe anyone this statement. We can easily publish the story without using your name if you prefer. No, Nora said, finding her strength. They violently took enough from me. They absolutely do not get to have my silence. 2. All right, Lena said incredibly softly. What exactly do you want to say to them? Nora took a very long, deep breath and spoke directly from the absolute rawest part of her soul. Tell them that I was absolutely never the villain in this story. I was just a Loyal woman who foolishly trusted the wrong people. I deeply believed in true love, in equal partnership, and in the absolute truth. And they aggressively turned that belief into cheap tabloid headlines. I lost my marriage, my entire career, and my peace of mind, but I absolutely will not lose my children to their toxic lies. Tell them that I forgive them, but I absolutely do not ever forget. There was a profound, heavy pause on the line. Then, Lena said quietly, "That is officially going on the record." When the emotional call ended, Nora instantly felt lighter, almost exactly as if bravely speaking the absolute truth had magically drawn out years of accumulated poison from her veins. Exactly 2 hours later, the explosive article hit the world exactly like a massive earthquake. The New York Times exclusive, the St. Tropez deception, how vicious lies built a billion-dollar marriage. It trended massively across absolutely every single platform within mere minutes. Glowing screens lit up everywhere with damning side-by-side photos. Sloane's exorbitant luxury galas heavily contrasted against the forged clinic receipts. Her completely fake relationship timelines were exposed in black and white. In New York, Sloane violently awoke to a terrifying flurry of notifications. Her phone literally exploded with frantic calls, panicking publicists, furious lawyers, aggressive journalists. Her carefully constructed empire was completely collapsing in real time. Adrian Kane's name appeared next on her glowing screen. She answered it, her voice violently shaking. "Adrian, darling, it's absolutely not what it looks like." "It's exactly what it looks like," he said incredibly coldly, his voice devoid of emotion. "I've personally read every single word of the article. I am officially resigning first thing tomorrow morning. And I am testifying against you. You absolutely wouldn't dare do that to me," she hissed venomously. "You dared first," he said simply, and hung up. Across the dark ocean, Nora sat incredibly quietly as a beautiful golden dawn crept slowly through the hospital window. Dr. Marchand entered, proudly holding the freshly printed article from Lena. The front page clearly featured Nora's powerful quote in bold letters. "Congratulations," the kind doctor said softly. "You burned significantly, brighter than their fire ever could." Nora smiled a very weak, exhausted smile, whispering, "Now the entire world finally knows the truth." But her secure phone suddenly buzzed again on the table. It was an unknown number, and a single, terrifying message that instantly chilled her blood. "Absolute truth is incredibly expensive. Nora, I really hope you can afford what comes next." The very next morning, the sprawling island of Manhattan looked entirely frozen. Under the incredibly pale, icy January light. Inside Kane Quantum's towering, mirrored headquarters. Intense, palpable tension rippled aggressively through the 42nd floor boardroom. Powerful executives whispered nervously in small, tight clusters, their panicked eyes darting constantly toward the conspicuously empty leather chair at the absolute head of the massive table, Adrian Kane's seat. On the massive glass wall, a giant flat screen displayed the devastating New York Times headline in bold print, the St. Tropez deception, medical fraud and corporate bribery inside Kane Quantum. Bright red stock tickers scrolled relentlessly and disastrously beneath the text. Sloane Park violently entered the room exactly like a raging storm and expensive designer heels, oversized, dark sunglasses poorly hiding the sheer exhaustion, and panic evident around her eyes. "Turn that damn thing off," she snapped aggressively at the terrified AV technician. "We absolutely do not give any oxygen to these pathetic lies." But the anxious murmurs in the room didn't stop. The entire room buzzed loudly with restrained, chaotic panic. "Mrs. Kane," said Richard Lum, the company's seasoned, highly respected legal counsel, "we've just received official legal notice of a massive federal inquiry. Both the SEC and the DOJ are demanding our immediate, full cooperation." Sloane forced an incredibly brittle, terrifying fake smile. "Then we will gladly cooperate with them. I'll personally handle the rabid press. Adrian will immediately issue a strong statement vigorously defending us." The entire room fell into a deathly silence. Richard cleared his throat nervously. "That may be significantly more complicated than you think." Before she could even ask why, the heavy glass door slid smoothly open, and Adrian Kane confidently walked into the room. He looked noticeably different, significantly calmer, much older, physically carrying the immense weight of absolutely everything he'd foolishly lost, but retaining absolutely none of the toxic arrogance that had once so clearly defined him. He quietly set a heavy leather briefcase down on the table. "Good morning," he said completely evenly, his voice steady. Sloane's voice violently trembled. "Adrian, thank God you're here. We can easily fix this mess together." He slowly shook his head, his eyes cold. "No, Sloane, we are absolutely not fixing this. We are finally facing it." Loud gasps echoed around the table. Adrian snapped open his briefcase and began calmly handing out thick printed documents, damning emails, massive financial transfers, forged clinic receipts. "Every single board member in this room will immediately receive a full, unredacted copy of this evidence. It clearly shows exactly who authorized the illegal bribes, who maliciously falsified the medical records, and who illegally manipulated our stock price for their own personal gain." Sloane's fake mask completely cracked. "You absolutely can't be serious. You're literally handing them the absolute truth," he interrupted her smoothly. "Something this corrupt company has completely forgotten how to handle." Richard Lum turned sharply to Sloane. "Mrs. Kane, your specific name appears on absolutely all of these documents. We will urgently need your official statement on the legal record." Her voice rose, frantic and desperate. This is an elaborate setup. He is just aggressively protecting that crazy woman, his ex-wife. She's been maliciously manipulating him for months. Adrian's expression hardened into pure granite. The absolute only person in this room who manipulated anyone was you, Sloan. You illegally forged federal documents to maliciously erase Nora's brilliant work. You actively framed her as mentally unstable, and you very nearly killed her in a fire just to keep her silent. Horrified gasps filled the sterile room. Sloane's icy composure entirely shattered into pieces. I did absolutely everything for you, she screamed, hysterically. For the survival of the company. For the perfect image that made you billions of dollars. He met her frantic gaze with absolute disgust. You did it entirely for yourself. He turned his back to her and faced the stunned board. Effective. Immediately. I am officially calling for an emergency board vote to permanently suspend Sloan Park from her role as Chief Communications Officer, pending a full federal investigation. Seconded, said a deep voice. It was Graham Sterling, who had quietly entered the room mere moments earlier. All in favor? Adrian asked the room. Trembling hands rose into the air. One by one. Every single one. Sloan stared blankly at the overwhelming sea of raised hands. Her own hands, trembling violently. You absolutely can't do this to me. I personally made Kane Quantum exactly what it is today. Adrian stood tall. And now, you'll finally answer for exactly what it became. Armed corporate security guards approached her quickly. She backed away in a panic, shaking her head. This absolutely isn't over. Adrian. It's been completely over for a very long time, he said incredibly quietly, as the burly guards aggressively escorted her out of the room. Sloane's pure fury visibly twisted into something incredibly dark and highly dangerous. She yanked herself free just long enough to hiss venomously at him. If I burn for this, I am absolutely taking you down with me. The heavy glass doors closed firmly behind her. Adrian let out a long, heavy breath and addressed the shocked board. We will cooperate fully and completely with the federal investigators. I will personally issue a statement tonight, officially announcing my immediate resignation as CEO. Graham frowned deeply in surprise. You're actually stepping down from the company? I absolutely have to, Adrian said, his voice full of resolve. True redemption requires real accountability. I simply can't continue to lead what I sow. Violently broke. Outside the glass tower, hundreds of flashing cameras already waited for him. Meanwhile, entirely across the ocean, Nora Leighton peacefully watched the live stream of the events from her quiet hospital room. The kind nurse turned up the TV volume as Adrian spoke solemnly at the press podium. I utterly failed the brilliant woman who actually helped build this entire company. I completely failed our corporate integrity. But the absolute truth stands significantly taller than any prophet ever will. This is my public apology, and this is my new beginning. Nora's eyes filled with soft, grateful tears. She didn't have to fight this time. But exactly in the corner of the live feed, she spotted something: the news. Cameras completely missed Sloane Park aggressively slipping into a dark, black sedan, her eyes burning with pure, unadulterated vengeance. And on Nora's phone screen, a single, terrifying word flashed brightly from an unknown sender. Tonight. Geneva was incredibly quiet that night. It was entirely too quiet. The heavy snow had finally stopped falling, leaving the entire sprawling city beautifully coated in a profound, white stillness. But Nora absolutely couldn't shake the deep, crawling unease tingling aggressively beneath her skin. The unborn twins kicked softly and restlessly under her ribs, reacting to her elevated heart rate. She sat anxiously by the large window of her temporary flat, intently watching the city lights shimmer beautifully over the dark expanse of Lake Geneva. The entire world outside looked incredibly peaceful. But she intimately knew that peace was almost always the very first cruel illusion. Right before a massive storm hit, her encrypted phone vibrated loudly on the table. It was one message from an unknown sender. "You really should have just stayed silent." Nora's blood instantly ran ice cold in her veins. She frantically reached for the phone to call Maya. But exactly before she could dial, the building's bright overhead lights flickered violently. Then, absolutely everything went pitch black. For a terrifying moment, there was absolutely nothing but deafening silence. Then, slowly, came the smell. It was a sharp, chemical, incredibly wrong smell of burning smoke. It seeped insidiously under the crack of the door, curling into the dark room exactly like a physical, malicious warning. The twins jolted violently inside her belly, reacting to the massive spike of stress adrenaline pulsing rapidly through her veins. "Not again," Nora whispered in pure panic, frantically grabbing her heavy go-bag from the floor. She desperately tried to stand up, but a sharp, excruciating pain knifed directly through her abdomen. She stumbled heavily, desperately, bracing herself against the cold wall to keep from falling. The building's emergency lights finally blinked weakly to life, casting a sinister, faint red glow. Outside her locked door, heavy footsteps echoed, loudly, incredibly heavy, highly deliberate, and moving rapidly closer. Her phone lit up brightly again with a new, terrifying message. "You desperately wanted the absolute truth. Here is exactly what it costs." Then came a loud, violent, metallic clang. It was the undeniable sound of the heavy deadbolt lock being aggressively broken from the outside. Nora's breath caught painfully in her throat. She backed frantically toward the window, searching for an escape. But before she could decide what to do, the heavy door burst violently open. Hungry, orange flames were already licking aggressively at the hallway walls directly behind it. Through the thick, choking smoke, a deeply familiar voice suddenly shouted, "Nora!" She completely froze in shock. Adrian? He suddenly appeared out of nowhere through the thick black haze, coughing violently, holding his heavy suit jacket tightly over his mouth and nose to breathe. He reached out desperately for her. We absolutely have to go right now. She stumbled forward blindly into his waiting arms, gasping desperately for clean air. How did you possibly find me? I illegally tracked your exact address immediately after the press conference. He yelled over the roar of the fire. I just had a terrible feeling. The burning ceiling groaned ominously above their heads. The fire was actively spreading incredibly fast along the narrow corridor. Adrian firmly guided her toward the emergency stairwell, using his own body to shield her from falling. Burning debris. Slow down, she gasped, agonizing pain slicing sharply through her side with every step. You can absolutely do this, he encouraged her, tightening his strong grip on her waist. Do it for them. By the time they finally reached the ground floor, the main entrance was completely blocked by a massive pile of burning rubble. Adrian desperately pulled her toward a small metal side exit, violently forcing the heavy door open with his shoulder. They stumbled out into the freezing, biting night air exactly as loud wailing sirens echoed in the immediate distance. Heavily geared firefighters rushed frantically past them, shouting urgent orders in rapid French. One of them immediately turned toward Nora. Madam, did you happen to see anyone else inside the building? She shook her head weakly, gasping for air. Just fire and pure fear. Adrian securely wrapped her tightly in his heavy, warm coat, pulling her closely and protectively against his chest. It's completely over now, he said softly, though his voice visibly trembled with adrenaline. But Nora's dark eyes darkened with absolute certainty. No, it is only just beginning. This fire absolutely wasn't random. As the arriving paramedics gently guided her into the back of the waiting ambulance, Dr. Marchand arrived on the scene, looking incredibly pale but intensely steady. We need to medically monitor you immediately. The baby's heart rates are dangerously unstable from the smoke. Adrian tried desperately to follow her inside the ambulance, but the doctor firmly blocked his path. She desperately needs absolute calm right now. Not more chaos. Nora met his desperate eyes directly through the open ambulance doors. You find out exactly who did this to us, she said fiercely. And you make them pay. He nodded firmly, his jaw set in stone. I promise you. Back in New York, Sloane Park casually poured herself another massive glass of expensive liquor in her dark penthouse, silently watching the live, breaking news coverage of the massive Geneva fire. Her reflection in the glass was perfectly calm and flawlessly composed until the secure phone sitting on her desk vibrated loudly. It was a highly encrypted message from Marcus Ames. You went entirely too far. This time, she miraculously survived. Sloane's manicured hand shook violently. spilling the drink. She quickly deleted the damning message and stared blankly out into the dark night. Then it is officially time to end this properly. At that exact same moment, Adrian's secure phone buzzed loudly in his pocket. While he stood freezing outside the Geneva hospital, he quickly pulled it out and read the shocking message that made his stomach twist into a knot. It was from Graham Sterling. Interpol just successfully confirmed the arson van's license plate. It was legally rented by Ames PR, directly under Sloan Park's digital authorization. Adrian looked up slowly at the glowing hospital windows, his angry reflection perfectly framed by the flashing red and blue emergency lights. You desperately wanted true redemption, he murmured fiercely to himself. Now, you go earn it. Inside the speeding ambulance, Nora lay completely still as the loud sirens wailed toward the safety of the hospital, the beautiful gold star charm on her neck glimmered faintly against her pale skin. She whispered incredibly softly to her unborn children. Just hold on, my sweet loves. True justice is finally coming. And directly behind them, the burning building collapsed in a massive, deafening roar of black smoke and twisted steel. The loud, wailing sirens echoed deafeningly across Geneva as the speeding ambulance tore recklessly through the dark, icy streets. Inside the claustrophobic cabin, Nora lay rigidly on the rolling gurney. One hand was clutching her swelling belly protectively. The other was gripping the metal edge of the stretcher, so hard her knuckles were bone white. The frantic paramedics' rapid French instructions blurred together into a chaotic hum, but one single, terrifying phrase broke clearly through the noise. Contractions every 2 minutes. Her exhausted mind reeled in absolute panic. Not now. Please. God. Not like this. Dr. Marchand leaned closely over her face incredibly calm, but her eyes burning with sheer urgency. You're actively going into early labor, Nora. The massive stress and the smoke inhalation triggered it. Listen to me very carefully. We will take excellent care of you. Just focus entirely on your breathing. Nora nodded incredibly weakly, gasping loudly as another brutal, agonizing contraction tore violently through her core. Please. Just save them. Both of them. The doctor said firmly, her voice leaving no room for doubt. We will do absolutely everything. The heavy hospital doors burst violently open as they arrived. A team of nurses rushed her aggressively down the hall and directly into surgery. The entire world flashed by in a disorienting blur of blinding, sterile white lights. The clear oxygen mask came down firmly over her face. The absolute last thing Nora saw before completely blacking out was Dr. Marchand's incredibly steady, reassuring eyes. When she finally woke up, the entire world was profoundly, beautifully still. Dim, warm light filtered softly through the closed blinds. Her battered body felt incredibly hollow and completely heavy with exhaustion. A very soft, Tiny cry suddenly broke the perfect silence. Then, miraculously, came another. Two distinct, fragile voices, weak, but undeniably, beautifully, alive. Dr. Marchand entered the quiet room, her kind eyes rimmed with deep exhaustion, but glowing with immense, profound relief. "They're finally here," she whispered. Softly. "You have two incredibly beautiful babies. A perfect boy and a perfect girl. They're very small, but they are incredibly strong." Nora's tight throat closed up entirely with emotion. Hot, happy tears slid freely down her pale cheeks as the doctor gently placed the two swaddled, tiny infants directly into her waiting arms. The little boy's incredibly tiny hand instinctively curled tightly around her index finger. The baby girl's soft mouth rooted gently against the warm cotton blanket. "Hello, my sweet loves," Nora whispered, her voice trembling with overwhelming joy. "Welcome to the world. They will absolutely need strict NICU monitoring for a few weeks," Dr. Marchand said incredibly softly. "But they are absolute fighters. Just exactly like their mother." Nora smiled a very faint, radiant smile. "River and Rain," she murmured lovingly. "That's their names." Outside the quiet room, Adrian stood silently behind the large observation glass, his hands pressed flat against the pane, his eyes completely red and wet with unshed tears. He watched in awe as Nora gently rocked the twins, her exhausted face absolutely glowing with the fragile, beautiful piece of sheer survival. A stern, uniformed security guard appeared suddenly beside him. "Mr. Kane, the Geneva police actively want to speak with you right now. They've successfully found the utility van responsible for starting the fire." Adrian turned sharply, his jaw clenching. "And it was officially rented under Ames PR's corporate credentials," the guard said grimly. "Interpol just successfully traced the payment directly to Sloan Park's personal corporate credit card." Adrian's stomach violently twisted with pure disgust. She actually tried to burn them alive. He immediately pulled out his phone and called Graham Sterling. "Send absolutely everything we have directly to the federal authorities right now. I completely do not care about the corporate fallout anymore. She is absolutely done." Graham's voice came through incredibly steady. "I already did it. The DOJ and Interpol are currently coordinating a massive raid. Sloan absolutely won't get very far. Meanwhile, thousands of miles across the ocean, Sloan Park sat entirely alone in her darkened, sprawling penthouse. The massive news channels on the TV were completely muted. A bright red, breaking news banner scrolled aggressively. Across the bottom of the massive screen, arson investigation directly links Sloan Park to attempted homicide in Geneva. Her manicured fingers clenched so tightly around her crystal glass of expensive whiskey that it nearly shattered. "No," she whispered frantically to the empty room. "They absolutely can't prove it. But then, her heavy front doorbell rang loudly. When she cautiously opened it, a dozen armed federal agents stood waiting in the hall, their shiny silver badges gleaming ominously under the bright hallway light. Sloan Park, you are officially under federal arrest for criminal conspiracy, massive obstruction of justice, and attempted homicide. Put your hands behind your back. Her mouth opened in shock, but absolutely no sound came out. Paparazzi cameras flashed blindingly from the elevator bank as they aggressively led her away in. Heavy steel handcuffs. Back in Geneva, Nora was finally, thankfully allowed to sleep and rest. The twins slept securely in the high-tech neonatal ward. Their initially soft cries, now settling into steady, rhythmic breaths. She eventually woke up to find Adrian sitting quietly in a chair right beside her hospital bed. He was still wearing the exact same soot-stained clothes from the night of the fire. "You really should go get some sleep," she said softly, her voice raspy. "I absolutely can't," he admitted, looking down at his hands. "Not until I finally truly thank you." "For what exactly?" "For surviving," he said simply, his voice breaking. "For safely bringing them here. For giving me one final, second chance to actually do something right in this life." Nora studied his exhausted face for a very long, quiet moment. "You absolutely do not get a second chance with me, Adrian. That is over. But you can be the good father they truly deserve." He nodded slowly, tears in his eyes. "That is absolutely all I want." She reached out and very gently touched his hand. "Then you start by fiercely protecting them from the toxic world we built." As beautiful dawn finally broke, the very first brilliant golden light spilled warmly into the hospital room, perfectly catching the gold star charm resting at Nora's throat. She looked down lovingly at River and Rain, sleeping peacefully together, and whispered, "You're completely safe now." But somewhere deep inside her soul, she intimately knew that complete safety was often only temporary. The absolute truth had significantly more enemies than she could ever count. And as the hospital monitors beeped in a steady, reassuring rhythm, Adrian's phone suddenly buzzed with a brand new, terrifying message. She's escaped federal custody. The quiet corridor outside the neonatal unit was washed beautifully in a dim, comforting gold light. High-tech machines hummed incredibly softly in the background. Medical monitors blinked in a steady, reassuring rhythm. And the sharp, clean scent of hospital disinfectant hung heavily in the cool air. It was exactly 3 a.m., the profound, quiet hour when hospitals always seem to feel suspended entirely between life and death, caught entirely between what was tragically lost and what could miraculously still be saved. Nora Leighton shuffled incredibly slowly down the long hallway. She kept one hand firmly gripped on her rolling four-pole, while the other brushed gently against the cold, painted wall for necessary balance. Her battered body ached profoundly, but her inner spirit burned incredibly steady and bright. Through the large, clear observation window, she saw them. River and rain. They were two tiny, perfect bundles of new life sleeping peacefully in clear glass. Cribs, their tiny chests rising and falling in absolutely perfect, synchronized rhythm. She smiled, a very faint, tired smile, whispering softly against the glass. You actually did it, my sweet loves. You finally made it. A very soft, deep voice directly behind her replied, They absolutely didn't do it alone. Nora turned around slowly. Adrian sat slumped heavily on the hard linoleum floor, his broad back resting against the wall. He was completely surrounded by dozens of tiny, intricate paper cranes folded meticulously from blank hospital admission forms. His dark hair was wildly tousled. His expensive suit jacket was heavily wrinkled and stained with soot, and his eyes looked incredibly hollow, but undeniably alive. What on earth are you doing down there? Nora asked gently. He held up one of the delicate paper cranes. My mother used to obsessively fold these when my father was going through his chemo treatments, he said, his voice thick with nostalgia. She always said that every 100 cranes folded grants you exactly one wish. Nora knelt incredibly carefully onto the floor right beside him. And what exactly are you wishing for tonight? He gave a very small, incredibly tired, broken laugh. Total redemption. Even though I'm honestly only at crane number 72. She studied his exhausted face quietly. You are completely exhausted, Adrian. So are you, he replied softly, meeting her eyes. But you just keep standing up anyway. That's exactly what good mothers do, she whispered fiercely. We stand up tall, even when absolutely everything else around us completely collapses. Adrian looked longingly toward the glowing nursery window. They really look exactly like you, he said incredibly softly. The little one, Rain. She frowns intensely in her sleep the exact same way you did when you were reading complex legal contracts at 2 a.m. Nora smiled, a genuine, warm smile, despite herself. And River? He tightly clenches his tiny fists exactly like he's already getting ready to aggressively fight the entire world, Adrian said, a proud smile forming. That one is definitely mine. For a very long, suspended time, a comfortable silence wrapped warmly around them, gentle, incredibly fragile, and almost entirely peaceful. Then, Adrian finally spoke again, his voice dropping incredibly low. I desperately need to ask you something, he said. Not as your failed ex-husband, but entirely as their father. Go on. I want to be a true co-parent, he said simply, his eyes pleading. I will absolutely never, ever ask for your romantic forgiveness. But I want to always be there for them. Every single messy school recital. Every terrifying midnight fever. Every first heartbreak. I want them to inherently know they're unconditionally loved. Nora's dark eyes softened considerably. And what about Sloan? He exhaled a long, frustrated breath. Interpol has officially issued a massive international arrest warrant, but she's completely gone off-grid. Her private jet supposedly left Paris under a highly forged false name. They will definitely find her. It is absolutely only a matter of time. Nora's hand tightened fiercely on the metal four-pole. She absolutely won't stop until she completely ruins everything we have. Then we actively stop her first, Adrian said, his jaw setting in. Determination. I will gladly testify against her in open court. I will willingly hand over every single encrypted file, every forged document, every recorded confession. Absolutely no slick lawyers, no silencing NDAs. Just the absolute, unvarnished truth. Nora looked at him incredibly carefully, actively searching his face for any lingering cracks in his sudden resolve. For once in his life, she saw absolutely none. Do you really know exactly what that means for you? She asked quietly. It means permanently losing absolutely everything I spent my life building, he said incredibly quietly, accepting his fate. But it also means finally giving our innocent children a father they can actually be proud of. She nodded very slowly in agreement. Then you'll definitely need to see a professional therapist. You will fully cooperate with all federal authorities. You will legally sign over your entire controlling share of Kane Quantum, directly to a blind trust for River and Rain. And you will absolutely never, ever let fear be your guiding reason again. He smiled a very weak, incredibly genuine smile. You still sound exactly like my ruthless corporate lawyer. No, Nora said incredibly softly. I sound exactly like the naive woman who used to deeply believe you could be a good man. He lowered his gaze in shame. Maybe I still can be. A busy night nurse passed by them in the hall, pausing to glance at them with a kind smile. You two really should be resting, she said gently. Nora stood up slowly, firmly gripping Adrian's offered hand to steady herself. Come, she whispered, pulling him up. They really should intimately know their father's face. Together, they stepped quietly into the sterile NICU. Adrian stood frozen beside the clear incubators, his eyes completely wet with tears as he watched his tiny children breathe. He placed a visibly trembling hand gently against the warm glass. Hi, River, he whispered brokenly. Hi, Rain. I'm your dad. I'm an absolute mess of a human being. But I'm finally here. Nora rested her tired head comfortingly on his broad shoulder. For the very first time in agonizing years, there was absolutely no burning anger between them. No toxic blame, just two exhausted parents staring in absolute awe at a miracle they had almost entirely lost. Then, Nora's secure phone vibrated violently on the plastic tray table. One urgent message glowed brightly on the screen from Maya. Private flight manifest officially found. Sloan Park is currently en route back to New York. Nora looked up at Adrian, her voice incredibly steady and cold as ice. Then, That is exactly where we finish this. And for the very first time in his entire life, Adrian absolutely didn't flinch or run away. He simply nodded his head in agreement and said, "Together." New York City shimmered beautifully under the relentless, freezing winter rain. The slick, dark streets glistened brightly with reflecting light from the towering courthouse lamps. Dozens of aggressive reporters and paparazzi eagerly crowded the wet sidewalks outside 100 Center Street, their black umbrellas colliding chaotically as hundreds of camera flashes burst into the gray air like miniature lightning strikes. Inside the massive courthouse, the air was significantly colder, incredibly tense, and heavily expectant. Nora Leighton sat incredibly still in the front row of the gallery. She wore an elegant silk scarf carefully draped around her neck, expertly covering the fading, purple bruises on her arm from the devastating Geneva fire. Sitting securely beside her, Maya Patel held a massive, thick legal folder overflowing with hard evidence, while Graham Sterling casually adjusted his silk tie, looking as impeccably calm and collected as ever. Across the wide wooden aisle, Sloane Park confidently entered the courtroom. She was dressed impeccably in a sharp, intimidating crimson suit, her manicured wrists secured in heavy steel cuffs. She held her chin incredibly high, staring straight ahead as the gallery cameras followed her every single calculated move. The heavy courtroom doors finally closed with a loud thud, and absolute silence fell over the room. "All rise," the uniformed clerk said loudly. Judge Holloway entered the room and took his seat. He was a gray-haired, incredibly sharp-eyed man known for his zero-tolerance policy. "Let's proceed," he said, his voice echoing firmly. Case 42B, The People vs. Sloane Park. Sloane's highly expensive, smooth-talking defense attorney in a custom Italian suit stood up confidently. "Your Honor, my client pleads absolutely not guilty to all charges. These outrageous accusations are entirely baseless and maliciously fueled by a petty, personal vendetta." Maya confidently rose next. "The prosecution calls Adrian Kane to the stand." Loud, shocked gasps instantly rippled aggressively through the packed room. Sloane's head jerked up violently. Sheer, unadulterated disbelief cutting completely through her icy poise. Adrian walked slowly into the courtroom. He was clean-shaven, his eyes incredibly steady, and he was carrying a single, worn, leather-bound notebook. It was Nora's original, handwritten project log. "Mr. Kane," Maya began clearly, approaching the stand, "can you please explicitly explain to the court exactly what this object is?" Adrian slowly opened the worn notebook. "This is the original, handwritten prototype of Kane Quantum's flagship predictive algorithm. It was written entirely from scratch by Nora Leighton. It features her exact handwriting, her original code, and her signature. But exactly 3 years ago, it was illegally, fraudulently registered entirely under my name. Maya stepped significantly closer. Did you knowingly and maliciously remove her? Rightful authorship. Adrian swallowed incredibly hard. No. Sloane Park entirely orchestrated the theft. She aggressively convinced me it was just a temporary, strategic image. Decision to appease nervous investors. I honestly didn't realize she had secretly filed permanent, binding legal documentation under a dummy corporation. Sloane violently slammed both of her palms down on the defense table. He is a pathological liar. The judge's wooden gavel cracked loudly like a gunshot. Order in this court. Adrian met Sloane's furious glare without flinching. You maliciously destroyed her public reputation. You illegally forged her medical records. And you very nearly burned her alive just to keep your fake story perfectly clean. Sloane's lawyer jumped up frantically. Objection. These are completely unsubstantiated, wild claims. Overruled, the judge snapped aggressively. Continue your testimony, Mr. Kane. Adrian's voice broke very slightly with emotion. When I saw her lying broken in that hospital bed with our innocent children, I finally realized the absolute truth. Absolutely everything Sloane built was pure theft, cleverly dressed up as corporate strategy. The courtroom went dead silent again. Maya triumphantly held up a small USB drive. Your Honor, this drive contains highly encrypted, verified financial transfers directly from Park PR to Ames Consulting, plus recovered CCTV security footage from the West 45th Street Clinic. It clearly shows Sloane Park actively paying massive bribes to falsify medical records. The damning footage played brightly on the massive courtroom screen. The dark, velvet pouch exchanging hands. The blatant bribe. Sloane's chilling voice, whispering clearly, delete every single trace of her name. Loud gasps echoed from the gallery. A horrified woman sitting in the jury box actually covered her mouth in shock. Sloane's icy, perfect mask finally cracked into pieces for the very first time. It absolutely wasn't supposed to go that far, she muttered defensively. Under her breath, Maya's tone turned into absolute, freezing ice. You mean the attempted murder? And arson in Geneva? Sloane completely froze. Interpol successfully traced the rented arson van directly back to your PR firm, Maya continued mercilessly. Your own executive assistant testified under oath against you. We have all the credit card receipts. You actively tried to burn a pregnant woman alive. Judge Holloway turned his stern gaze to the defense table. Counselor? Sloane's defeated lawyer visibly slumped into his chair. We have absolutely no further questions, Your Honor. The judge faced the jury box. We will now recess for final deliberation. As the shocked jurors filed quickly out of the room, Nora stood up incredibly, slowly. Her legs physically shook with adrenaline, but her dark gaze was absolutely steady. Sloane glared at her across the crowded room, her eyes completely wild with cornered panic. You actually think you've won this? Sloane hissed venomously. You absolutely can't ever erase me from history. Nora met her furious stare with absolute calm. I absolutely don't need to erase. You, Sloane. The absolute truth already did. Mere minutes later, the jury returned to the box. On absolutely all counts, massive corporate fraud, obstruction of federal justice, and attempted homicide, we find the defendant guilty. The heavy gavel struck the block with finality. Sloane's entire body went completely limp, sagging exactly like a broken doll as armed officers moved in to restrain her. She screamed exactly once, a guttural, terrifying sound breaking through the marble hall. Adrian, you will absolutely regret doing this to me. But Adrian didn't even bother to look back at her. He turned entirely toward Nora, silent, grateful tears pooling in his eyes. Outside the building, hundreds of hungry reporters swarmed them aggressively as they stepped out into the freezing cold. Flashbulbs popped blindingly. Loud voices shouted questions, but absolutely none of it mattered anymore. Graham placed a warm, protective hand gently on Nora's shoulder. It is finally over. Nora shook her head incredibly softly, smiling. No, Graham. It is finally beginning. Hours later, at a massive, televised press conference, Adrian stood proudly. Beside her at the podium, cameras rolled globally as he spoke clearly. I am officially resigning my position as CEO of Kane Quantum today. I will be irrevocably dedicating all of my corporate shares to a brand new ethics foundation, and directly to the brilliant woman whose hard work actually built absolutely everything. He looked over at Nora with deep respect. Miss Leon, will you please formally accept the position of Head of Innovation? She hesitated for a brief, dramatic second, then smiled a faint, knowing smile. For the sake of the future. Yes. As thunderous applause completely filled the massive room, a silent courier entered quietly, handing Adrian a sealed envelope. He opened it, read the contents, and completely froze in shock. It was an official decree from the corporate board. Appointment officially confirmed. Nora Leighton is now interim CEO and head of innovation. Nora exhaled a long, deep breath. A lifetime of grueling, brutal battles, collapsing beautifully into one single, victorious breath. Outside the window, fresh, clean snow began to fall again, soft, pure, and incredibly silent. It was the world's quiet, beautiful way of officially saying that true justice had finally, permanently arrived. Exactly 1 year later, the massive, dripping crystal chandeliers of the Plaza Hotel shimmered brilliantly, exactly like captured constellations in the night sky. Outside the grand entrance, a long line of sleek black limousines idled on Fifth Avenue, their powerful engines purring softly under a cold, refreshing spring drizzle. Inside the opulent ballroom, hundreds of elite guests joyfully clinked crystal champagne glasses under massive, elegant banners that proudly read the Kane Quantum Foundation, Ethics and Innovation Gala. The entire world had changed fundamentally in 12 short months. Sloane Park was currently serving a grueling 12-year federal sentence in the maximum security Bedford Hills Correctional Facility. Adrian Kane had officially, legally stepped down from every single one of his corporate titles, humbly becoming the silent chairman of a brand new nonprofit heavily focused on corporate transparency and ethics. And Nora Leighton, the woman who was once tragically written off as the pathetic ghost of a tabloid scandal, now stood proudly at the absolute center of it, all vibrantly alive, completely restored, and undeniably radiant. She arrived incredibly quietly, dressed impeccably in a stunning, minimalist, white sheath gown, her dark hair pinned elegantly in soft, classic waves, resting beautifully around her neck. The tiny gold star charm gleamed brightly. Under the lights, a small, highly personal symbol of every single deep scar she'd bravely survived. But it was the two beautiful children tightly holding her hands that truly commanded the room. River and Rain, now confidently toddling around with wide, curious eyes, instantly turned absolutely every head in the massive ballroom. Happy gasps rippled through the elite crowd. Cameras flashed respectfully. Someone nearby whispered in awe, "That's really her." The brave woman who completely exposed the absolute truth. Nora smiled a very faint, utterly unfazed smile. She had successfully learned the hard way that absolute silence and grace were infinitely more powerful than any loud, desperate spectacle. From across the crowded ballroom, Graham Sterling approached her, looking incredibly sharp and handsome in a custom navy tuxedo. "I absolutely knew you'd eventually come tonight," he said warmly, his eyes shining. "I obviously couldn't hide away in my office forever," she replied with a soft laugh. "Besides, tonight is entirely our night. The Foundation's official first anniversary." He nodded proudly toward the grand stage. "Your upcoming keynote speech is already trending massively online. People desperately want to hear you talk about successfully rebuilding corporate integrity." "Let them," she said confidently. "The world could desperately use a strong reminder that genuine honesty absolutely doesn't make you weak. It makes you entirely unstoppable." Nearby at the bar, Maya Patel happily clinked champagne glasses with Lena Ortiz, who was exclusively covering the massive event for the New York Times. "Who on earth would have actually thought it?" Maya said, grinning. "Going from terrifying federal courtrooms straight to expensive champagne." Lena smiled a brilliant, knowing smile. "The absolute truth has an incredibly funny way of dressing up nicely for its well-deserved victory lap." At that exact moment, the live orchestra began to play an incredibly soft, sweeping melody. Adrian Kane quietly entered the room through the discreet side doors. His tuxedo was perfectly crisp, and his facial expression was incredibly solemn, yet profoundly peaceful. Loud conversations instantly hushed as he confidently crossed the massive room, directly toward Nora. For a long, charged moment, the very air in the room noticeably shifted. The immense, crushing weight of absolutely everything they'd once been together, and absolutely everything they'd tragically lost, hung heavily and silently between them. "Congratulations, Nora," Adrian said incredibly gently, his voice full of respect. "You genuinely made all of this possible." She looked deeply at him, her beautiful expression entirely unreadable. "We absolutely both did. In our own, very different ways." He smiled a very sad, knowing smile. "You were absolutely right that day on the balcony in Geneva. True redemption isn't the same thing as forgiveness. But I honestly think I finally, truly understand the deep value of both." Nora studied his face carefully, then slowly extended a warm hand to him. "Then, welcome back to the human race, Adrian." He chuckled incredibly softly, gratefully accepting her offered hand. "Do you mind if I say a quick hello to them?" She nodded gracefully. Adrian knelt down on the polished floor, meeting the twins' wide, curious eyes levelly. "Hi, River. Hi, Rain. Do you two have any idea how incredibly brave your mom really is?" River blinked at him very solemnly, analyzing him. Rain just giggled happily, playfully tugging at his expensive silk tie. "They've definitely got your legendary stubbornness," Nora teased him lightly. "And they've absolutely got your incredible fire," he replied softly, looking up at her with pure gratitude. The live orchestra suddenly swelled beautifully as the evening's charismatic host announced loudly from the main stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Nora Leighton, the brilliant head of innovation and the proud founder of the Marchand Initiative, entirely dedicated to ethical technology for all future generations." Deafening applause thundered violently through the massive room. Nora stepped confidently onto the stage, the bright spotlights bathing her beautifully in warm gold. She began speaking incredibly softly, but her voice was remarkably calm and entirely resolute. "Exactly 1 year ago today, I genuinely thought my entire life story had tragically ended in a pile of ashes. But the absolute truth is, every single devastating ending is really just a beautiful invitation to rise again." She paused, letting the profound silence fill the room. "Tonight absolutely isn't about celebrating scandal or mere survival. It is entirely about creation. It is about exactly what beautiful things we can build together when we absolutely refuse to let blind greed permanently define our genius." She glanced out at the enraptured crowd, her loving gaze pausing specifically on Maya, Graham, and Adrian. "Absolutely no technological innovation matters if it ultimately costs us our basic humanity. The true future isn't just built by complex algorithms. It is built entirely by strict accountability." The massive audience rose to their feet in unison, the thunderous applause swelling exactly like a massive, unstoppable ocean wave, as Nora gracefully stepped down from the podium. Graham leaned over and whispered proudly in her ear, "You literally just rewrote history tonight." "Not history," she said, smiling an incredibly soft, peaceful smile. Just my specific part in it. Suddenly, the massive double doors of the ballroom burst violently open with a deafening crash. Armed hotel security rushed frantically forward. Mass confusion, rapidly spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Standing defiantly at the entrance was Sloane Park. Her bright red prison-issued coat was completely soaked by the freezing rain, her wild eyes burning with absolute, unhinged fury. "I explicitly told you," Sloane screamed like a banshee, her crazed voice echoing terrifyingly through the silent hall. "You absolutely cannot ever erase me." The wealthy crowd gasped in pure horror. Flashbulbs flared blindingly. Nora turned around incredibly slowly, her demeanor as completely calm as deep, still water. "You are absolutely not erased, Sloane. You will be permanently remembered as the ultimate cautionary tale for exactly what the absolute truth costs when it is selfishly sold." Security aggressively moved in, but Sloane violently stepped forward, her entire body trembling with psychotic rage. "You actually think all these people genuinely love you? You think fake redemption lasts forever?" Nora met her crazed, wild eyes without flinching a single inch. "No. But my innocent children will safely grow up completely free of your toxic lies." Sloane lunged violently forward with a scream, but massive police officers expertly restrained her, brutally escorting her kicking and screaming back out into the freezing rain. The entire ballroom fell into a stunned, deafening silence. Nora calmly turned back to the stunned crowd, then looked down at the twins, who were still safely clutching Maya's warm hands. She smiled a very faint, beautiful smile. "Now, where exactly were we?" And as the thunderous applause slowly, respectfully rose again in the room, the plaza's massive crystal chandeliers flickered briefly, the brilliant light returning significantly stronger and brighter than ever before. The violent storm that had raged outside the plaza had finally, completely, passed, leaving the entire island of Manhattan looking beautifully washed clean. Under a crisp, silver dawn, the wet, black asphalt streets glistened brightly in the early light, and for the very first time in agonizing years, the crisp, morning air felt incredibly light, refreshing, and almost entirely forgiving. The absolute chaos of the night before had already seamlessly transitioned into a massive, global morning headline: "Disgraced PR Queen Sloane Park recaptured after violently crashing ethics gala." The dramatic, shaky cell phone footage played endlessly on a loop across every single major news network. It showed Sloane's rain-soaked, furious face, her hysterical screams completely swallowed up by the blindingly flashing police lights, her carefully constructed, fake empire permanently reduced to nothing but pathetic echoes. But inside the luxurious, serene penthouse suite of the hotel, Nora Leighton sat in perfect, quiet stillness, wrapped comfortably in a plush, soft white robe. The twins, River and Rain, slept incredibly peacefully in their shared crib nearby. The faint, distant, energetic hum of the waking city far below blended perfectly with the steady, comforting rhythm of their tiny, rhythmic breaths. A very soft, polite knock came at the heavy suite door. Nora looked up calmly. "Come in." Adrian Kane stepped quietly inside, still wearing his somewhat wrinkled tuxedo from the night before. The bone-deep fatigue evident in his eyes was wonderfully tempered by something significantly gentler and new, absolute, profound clarity. He carefully carried 2 steaming paper cups of coffee, respectfully offering one to her. "Black. Absolutely no sugar," he said incredibly softly. "Still exactly how you like it." She smiled, a very faint, genuine smile, taking the warm cup. "Still exactly how I managed to survive the mornings." He sat down comfortably in the armchair directly across from her, the brilliant morning sunlight perfectly framing his exhausted, handsome face. "The police just officially released a public statement," he informed her. Quietly, "Sloan is being immediately transferred to a maximum security psychiatric facility for evaluation. There will absolutely be no bail allowed this time." Nora nodded slowly, her beautiful expression entirely unreadable. She will finally have plenty of quiet time to sit and face exactly what she's done. Adrian hesitated for a long moment, nervously rubbing his hands together. "And what about you, Nora? What exactly happens for you now?" Nora looked thoughtfully toward the massive window, where bright, golden sunlight was currently spilling beautifully over the green expanse of Central Park. "Now, I finally get to just live," she said softly, but with absolute conviction. "I build my company. I raise my children right. As for the rest, well, I will simply let the world decide exactly what they think I am." He leaned forward intensely, his eyes full of respect. "The world is already definitively decided, Nora. They clearly see you as the incredibly brave woman who proudly stood up when absolutely everyone else told her to sit down and be quiet." She met his intense gaze without flinching. "And what exactly do you see, Adrian?" He paused, a look of profound, agonizing regret flashing across his face. Then said incredibly quietly, "I see the absolute, incredible woman I should have fiercely fought for the very first time around." For a very long, charged moment, neither of them spoke a single word. The massive city hummed energetically around them, life moving rapidly forward, exactly as if in joyful approval of their peace. Finally, Nora broke the heavy silence. "You actually did fight, Adrian. Eventually, you bravely stood up and told the absolute truth. You successfully saved us from her." He slowly shook his head, refusing the unearned praise. "No, Nora. You entirely saved yourself. I just finally, smartly followed your incredible lead." She laughed incredibly softly, the sound like wind chimes. "Then please, continue to follow through, Adrian. Keep the new foundation absolutely clean." Make absolutely sure that Kane Quantum never, ever reverts back to the toxic monster it once was. He nodded firmly, absolute dedication in his eyes. I already legally dissolved every single one of the remaining offshore accounts this morning. Now, the brand new corporate board is entirely full of honest people who deeply believe in absolute financial transparency. And that is entirely because of you, she said incredibly gently. Not because of me, but because of what the absolute truth actively demands from us. Adrian stood up slowly, looking lovingly down at the sleeping twins. They'll absolutely know. You know, one day, when they're older, they'll inevitably read absolutely everything on the internet about the massive scandal, the terrible fire, the federal trial. What exactly do we tell them when they ask? Nora rose gracefully from her chair, gently brushing her fingertips over the smooth wooden edge of the crib. We simply tell them the absolute truth. We tell them that their parents were incredibly flawed, but that they bravely fought the darkness to become better people. We tell them that immense power means absolutely nothing in this life without a good heart. And we teach them that sometimes the absolute greatest revenge you can ever achieve is simply finding profound peace. He smiled, his voice dropping to almost a reverent whisper. Peace, honestly, sounds incredibly good right now. She looked at him, her dark eyes incredibly warm but undeniably firm. We will absolutely never, ever be what we were before, Adrian. But maybe we can successfully be something entirely new, something completely honest. He nodded very slowly, profound acceptance in his eyes. Absolute honesty is something I can happily live with. Outside the window, the bright morning rapidly deepened into full daylight. Nora smoothly opened the heavy glass balcony doors, letting in a massive, refreshing rush of crisp, cold air. The sprawling city stretched incredibly wide beneath her, vibrantly alive and bathed in golden light. River stirred softly in the crib, his small, chubby fist curling tightly in. Sleep. Rain turned over gently, murmuring an incredibly soft, happy baby sound. Nora turned back to Adrian with a soft smile. You really should go now. The hungry press will definitely start looking for fresh quotes from you very soon. He chuckled. A light, genuine sound. They absolutely always do. He walked slowly toward the heavy suite door, then paused with his hand on the handle. Nora, thank you for absolutely everything. She smiled warmly. Don't thank me, Adrian. Just stay entirely true to yourself. When the heavy door finally clicked shut, Nora stood completely alone for a long, beautiful moment, simply breathing in the warm, golden morning light. Then, she calmly took out her secure phone and typed a very short, decisive message to Maya Patel. The tragic story is officially over. It's time to start writing the next beautiful chapter. Maya replied almost instantly. Are you absolutely ready? Nora looked deeply at her sleeping children, then looked out at the majestic, towering skyline, entirely overwhelmed by the endless, bright promise of the beautiful morning. More than ever, she texted back confidently. She placed the phone casually aside on the table, gently picked up both of the sleeping twins in her strong arms, and whispered incredibly softly into their hair, "Let's finally go home." As the bright sun rose significantly higher into the sky, the massive city aggressively came alive with deafening noise and frantic motion. But inside that incredibly quiet, sunlit room, Nora Leighton had already successfully found absolutely everything she would ever need in this life. She didn't just miraculously survive her tragic story, she completely, beautifully rewrote it. So, that is exactly how our incredible story finally ends today. And if you are still here with me, my wonderful friend, listening all the way to this very final moment, then something profound in Nora's epic journey must have truly touched your heart, too, right? Maybe it beautifully reminded you that even when this brutal life violently burns absolutely everything you love down to the ground, you absolutely still have the power to rise from the ashes significantly stronger, wiser, and more powerful than ever before. This incredible story wasn't just a tale about seeking petty revenge or public redemption. It was deeply about profound, true healing. It was about fundamentally learning, exactly as the brilliant ancient Stoics taught us, that we absolutely cannot ever control what terrible things happen to us in this world, but we completely, entirely control exactly how we bravely choose to respond. As the great philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wisely wrote, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. And that is exactly what Nora fearlessly did. She masterfully turned her agonizing pain into absolute power, and her devastating heartbreak into a brilliant, driving purpose. So maybe tonight, wherever you are sitting in the world, take a massive, deep breath and firmly remind yourself that you are infinitely stronger than you think you are. If this powerful story truly spoke to your soul today, please give this video a massive like so I know it resonated with you. Share it right now with someone in your life who desperately needs a little hope tonight. And please, don't ever forget to subscribe to our growing channel. Because right here, together, we will always keep finding the undeniable courage to rise again. See you in the next video.